Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another edition of the Hitting the Field podcast. It's your host, Jeremy Brener, and today we are giving out report cards. The students become the professors. The students at UCF at Hitting the Field, we are handing out report cards to the 16 AFC teams based off of their draft performance. Can't do this alone, so I brought along two co-pilots along for the ride to help steer this ship. We have Mr. Okelo Pena on the show today. Okelo, how's it going?
It's going great, Jeremy. I'm ready to give out the midterm grades before the NFL season starts. So
Absolutely.
let's give these teams some good old fashioned A's or F's.
Absolutely. And we have Mr. Robert Husby on call with us today. Robert, how's it going, my friend?
It's going good, going good. Excited to keep talking football and give some of these teams some grades from their draft days.
Yeah, so yesterday we broke down the NFC teams with Chris Wolf and John Whitley. You can go and catch that wherever you listen to podcasts or our YouTube channel at Hitting the Field. Be sure to subscribe now. So we start off at the top of the draft with the Cincinnati Bengals. We had known since they were on the clock pretty much that they were going to select Joe Burrow with the number one pick. They also they had a pretty simple draft. They drafted at the top of every round. No trades, no extra picks. They got 7 guys for their draft class. They got T. Higgins from Clemson, also was in that national championship game. They got a pair of linebackers in the 3rd and 4th round with Logan Wilson and Akeem Davis. Then you get some depth pieces late in day 3 with Khalid Kareem from Notre Dame, Hakeem Adeniji from Kansas, and Marcus Bailey from Purdue. But overall, obviously, Robert, this draft class is going to be defined by how well Joe Burrow can shine as the new Bengals starting quarterback.
Yeah, I mean, their grade entirely depends on how Joe Burrow pans out in the NFL. He's certainly an NFL-style quarterback. You know, there's a lot of faith being put in him to be that franchise quarterback. I mean, you see that today, right before we're getting on. Adam Schefter announced that Cincinnati just cut, Andy Dalton.
Yeah.
So they're putting a lot of faith into Joe Burrow, as they should, as he's a first overall pick. So, it's entirely contingent, this draft, on how well Joe Burrow performs going forward for Cincinnati. Is he going to be the catalyst for change in a team that really hasn't been on a good course their last decade or so, or is he going to be a bust? And that's, something that's going to pan out over time. So that's where Cincinnati kind of stands with this draft.
Yeah. Okay, well, obviously Burrow is the headline for this draft class, but what's a pick that came later in the draft for Cincinnati that stands out to you?
For me, I mean, the obvious choice would be to go for the steal that was T. Higgins available in the 2nd round, but I look at the 5th round pick, Khalid Kareem out of Notre Dame. That's a steal to me, one of the most underrated prospects in the draft. And to help out Cincinnati's defense, I mean, with Geno Atkins and Carlos Dunlap, that's going to be a major boost to their defense. Now, obviously, he's a 5th round pick, so it's going to be likely a fight for him in training camp. But I think if he makes it out of it, he could be a big boost to this defense. And, even though the Bengals didn't have a great defense last year, in past, they've usually been a top 10, top 15 defense. So I think he could come in and be a tremendous help right away if he can. To help Cincinnati's defense become a top 10 defense once again.
Right. I thought that I really liked the Kareem pick as well. I think that that pick came when they probably could have gotten him earlier, and he was still there at the top of the 5th, and he was taken with the first pick in that 5th round. He joins a bunch of, the pass rush for Cincinnati has never really, in my opinion, been a real position of need. They've always had strong pieces on that front 7, but they got the best player available, and I think that is where I think they're happy with that. But they also, the thing is with Cincinnati, they spent a lot of money through free agency. They got Mackenzie Alexander and Trey Waynes from Minnesota to help that secondary, Von Bell from New Orleans. So they didn't really need to address the secondary too much. And I mean, they get Isaiah Swan, in undrafted free agency out of Dartmouth, who I've heard from a couple friends at Dartmouth that he is outstanding, and he could actually make this roster. Who knows? But yeah, obviously Joe Burrow is where you are going to make your money here, and I like the T Higgins the T Higgins drafting. I think with AJ Green's obviously the guy, but he's also kind of on his way out, and you need a guy that's able to replace that production. And I think that T Higgins, he was originally, when we were doing our mock drafts earlier in the year, he was seen as a, pretty consensus first round pick, and he slid in recent months to as low as, the late second. But getting him at the top of the second, I think really shows, how talented he is. And he could have easily been a first round pick. I'm very, and I also think the fit there is actually going to be really good. I think he's going to get a chance to start. He's gonna have a good opportunity to catch passes from Joe Burrow, and could be the next great Bengals wide receiver. I really believe that. I think that he has a great chance to do that for the Bengals. So let's throw a grade on this, gentlemen. Let's I'll start with you, Okelo. What grade are we giving the Bengals for this draft?
Ooh, well, it's really tough for me to grade as good on a AFC North rival as I do, but I'm going to give the Bengals a minus. I mean, I loved, every one of their picks. They did have a couple of question marks, like Akeem Davis Gatier, the linebacker out of Appalachian State. Didn't really woo me enough in the combine and in certain other game highlights that I like. But, they addressed some offensive line help getting Hakeem Magin, from Kansas, which I really liked. And, overall, Joe Burrow, they got their guy. They got a great guy with T. Higgins, and I think otherwise than that, Marcus Bailey, a great addition in Purdue. Hopefully he makes it out of camp. I think I'll give Cincinnati an A- on this one.
A- for Cincinnati. Robert, where are you going with this?
I'm going to give them a B+ for now. I think they had a solid draft, like you guys said. I love the T. Higgins drafting. I think that's a solid weapon that you give Burrow, that he can sort of grow with and familiarize himself with alongside A.G. Green and Joe Mixon. Joe Mixon obviously being back there as well as a weapon that they have. But I say a B+ just because it's contingent on Joe Burrow. If Joe Burrow pans out and does become a top quarterback, it's a solid A, clearly. But this is one of those drafts, like any first-round quarterback draft, where you have to see what happens with the quarterback. And until Joe Burrow takes a snap in the NFL, we can't really say how we rank that signing. I mean, certainly on paper, it's an A because he's the best quarterback available, but we just got to see how his career pans out. So it's contingent on how he does, but B+ for now.
Yeah, to me, Cincinnati, even if Joe Burrow becomes a bust, I can't blame Cincinnati because the tape and just the overall as a prospect, Joe Burrow was clearly the top pick, and you weren't, even though there are some great players that went after Joe Burrow, it would have been pretty suspect and pretty controversial for the Bengals to take anyone other than Joe Burrow. So obviously this draft is dependent on whether or not Joe Burrow succeeds in the NFL, but for me, I'm going to go with the B+ as well, just because I think it's a great draft, and I think you get Joe Burrow, the best quarterback in the draft. You need a quarterback, clearly, so you do that. And I think though that but that's the thing, is there's so much weighing on just one guy in this draft that is so, and that's difficult. So that's why I can't give them an A. And I'm not and to be honest, if T. Higgins pans out as well, I think it's fine. I'm not guaranteeing that T. Higgins is going to be a superstar, though. And to me, I'm worried about whether or not he can stay healthy as well. That to me is a bit of a concern. So for me, Cincinnati gets a B+. But let's move on to Okelo. I'm going to give it to you, the Pittsburgh Steelers. I'm going to let you take the lead on this one, and just break down this 6-man draft class that the Steelers have from this past draft.
Man, all right. So for the Pittsburgh Steelers, just give me one quick second as I pull up the nice board that you kindly gave us, Jeremy.
Mm-hmm.
So for the Steelers, we went a little bit. Obviously, we didn't have a first round pick, so we got a lot of like mid cards and some guys that I like, some guys that I'm not so high on. With our first pick in the second round, we got Chase Claypool.
That's a hard word. That's a hard one to say. That they should get an F just for that. I mean, man, could you have gotten a harder name to pronounce?
I apologize for that, but yeah, Chase Claypool, the big, strong wide receiver out of Notre Dame. In the third round, we got Alex Highsmith, the outside linebacker out of Charlotte. I was surprised with this pick, but in the fourth round, we got Anthony McFarland Jr. out of Maryland. From the Titans pick through Miami, we got Kevin Dotson out of Louisiana. In the sixth round, we got Antoine Brooks Jr., safety out of Maryland. And with the seventh round pick, we got Carlos Davis, defensive tackle out of Nebraska. And that rounds up the Steelers' 2020 draft class.
What did you think of this draft?
Well, I'll say this. The Chase Claypool pick surprised me a lot, Jeremy. And because, Claypool was a decent wide receiver. He didn't necessarily thrill me, but I knew that the Steelers were going to draft a wide receiver. To me, I just didn't know who. And I would have been a little bit okay. I would have been more thrilled if Denzel Mims was a Steeler because I did like him a little more, even though he was an ace. He was a wild card, as we talked about. But I see what they're trying to do with Claypool, and knowing the history of Steelers wide receivers and how we developed them, I'm curious to see how he works. And also, he's a guy that grew up in Toronto, Canada. One of my uncle's favorite players. He watched him in high school. Actually, was a part of the coaching staff that was part of him. So he was very happy that a good old Canadian got drafted. I'll say that some of the picks, like, for example, Anthony McFarland, it didn't make sense to me when we are already loaded with running back with James Conner, and then we drafted Benny Snell the previous year out of Kentucky. So I was surprised with McFarland Jr., but I think the Steelers were looking for a little more athleticism in their running back position, so they grabbed him. I like the Kevin Dotson pick out of Louisiana. He's a strong offensive lineman. He wasn't highly talked about in the draft, but I kind of looked at him as an underrated prospect. He's going to come in and help an offensive line that's been revolving around a little bit. And then they really went, defensive-wise. I think the defense is kind of set, but not otherwise. It's not too bad to have guys like Alex Highsmith, another wild card type of developmental project. I think Antoine Brooks Jr., an underrated safety out of Maryland, he was decent enough to get the pick. And then I like Carlos Davis out of Nebraska. My hope is that he can come out of camp and make it through. Otherwise, it's not necessarily a entire draft class that I'm thrilled with Pittsburgh, obviously compared to last year when we traded up to get Devin Bush, but I think it's pretty decent. It's pretty solid. The Steelers got some needs, and then they're trying to fill up the depth chart. So I think, otherwise Pittsburgh did a decent job, and it's just up to the coaching staff to develop these prospects as they're accustomed to.
Yeah, for me, I was surprised that they drafted Chase Claypool when they did. To me, what I'm seeing is Chase Claypool is going to be seen as more of a tight end. He has the size for it. He does. My thoughts is I think Pittsburgh wanted to draft Cole Kmet. I think that's who they were looking for in the second. Mm-hmm. I think that they were hoping that he was going to fall to 49. And he did not. He was taken by Chicago at 43. Tight end would have made a lot more sense for them, considering I feel like their depth at wide receiver is perfectly fine. I think Juju Smith-Schuster is clearly your top receiver. James Washington also is going to be a starter next year, and then Deontay Johnson as well. You have three wide receivers that you clearly have that are the starters. I don't see Chase Claypool as a second round pick even beating out any of those three guys. And that is why I think you're going to play Claypool as more of a tight end. And, he's 6'4", 238, according to Wikipedia, which who knows if that's right or not. But, I mean, but when I saw this team, it's weird. Maybe I'm just noticing now that, Pittsburgh has is probably a better team than I thought they were. I mean, their defense last year was pretty good. Probably one of the best three defenses in the NFL. They didn't really need they didn't need to fill a whole lot of holes on the defensive side. And I mean, they really didn't. I mean, Mike Hilton is not yet signed, but I mean, you still have great depth at the corner spot with Hayden and Nelson, and you have Terrell Edmonds in the secondary. To me, I mean, Pittsburgh, they didn't have a whole lot of needs. Maybe on the offensive line you look for a potential long-term replacement for Villanueva, but other than that, I mean, and maybe that's the one place where I think that they don't get a guy, and maybe I would have liked to see them possibly go for a quarterback.
I was thinking that too.
And Jalen Hurts was available at 49, so that's kind of where I think a lot of people were going. The fact that they didn't doesn't really bother me because I'm pretty sure this means that they probably will get one next year. But I'm not mad at the Steelers draft. I just think that there were needs that needed to be filled that weren't filled, and I think that the McFarland draft at the 4th round was absolutely it was unnecessary, completely unnecessary.
I agree. Like I said, we already had enough backfield depth. Yeah.
So, Robert, let's bring you in on this. What do you think about the Steelers, and what pick maybe was a pleasant surprise to you that you like from this draft class?
I actually really like the Antoine Brooks draft. I think that's a really good value for a 6th-round pick. Being a safety, Steelers don't have a lot of safety depth there, so getting a guy like that in the 6th round is really good. I think he's a solid pick there. But yeah, I totally agree with what you guys are saying on, really signing almost like volume signings where they're just kind of adding to the depth that they already have with McFarland. You already have Snell and James Conner. You already have 2 solid running backs. So you're just adding a third to that with McFarland, even though he's a solid pick and he's a good running back. But the same thing with Claypool. They already have wide receiver depth and they're just continuing to add to that. So yeah, I mean, I totally agree with that. I think they didn't do anything that really super impressed me, but I think they just added more depth. And, depth is never a bad thing. If that's what they felt they needed to add in this draft, well, they definitely did that. So I agree. But for sure, Antoine Brooks is the one that stands out to me if there is a standout draft pick in the Steelers draft this year. Yeah.
All right, let's throw a grade on this. I'm going to start, and I'm going to give them a C. I'm just, there's not a whole lot of promise in this draft. The fact that they don't have a 1st-round pick definitely hurts them here. To me, I think that there's not a whole lot of people that have a full opportunity to stand out in this draft, to be a long-term guy. And that's ultimately why I have to give them no better than a C. There's not a whole lot of promise here. I think, honestly, if I'm being real, I think the best chance for any of these guys to make a long-term starter out of this is probably Kevin Dotson once Wisniewski leaves. He's only on a 1-year deal, so maybe, or a 2-year contract, so maybe he leaves halfway through it. And he can start there. But to me, I don't see a whole lot of growth from this class. So a C is what I'll give for the Steelers. What about you, Robert?
Yeah, I would give them a B-. Like I said, I like Antoine Brooks. I like McFarland. I like Claypool. Just nothing that really super stands out. So I think a B- is solid for them. Obviously, like you said, not having a 1st-round pick hurts a lot, but they did use that to get Minkah Fitzpatrick. So, I mean, get a top safety like that, I mean, definitely makes that worth it because you don't know who they would have drafted in the 1st round with that pick. So, I'll give them a B minus. Nothing that really stands out, but it wasn't a horrible draft for them either.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Lo, what do you got for us?
I'm going to go with you, Jeremy. I'm going to give him a C as well. Like I said, a lot of picks that were questionable. I mean, the Claypool pick, I'm semi-thrilled about. And as you mentioned, though, the need is kind of tight end, even though we did sign Eric Ebron in free agency. But, and also we could have drafted a quarterback. I would have loved to have Jalen Hurts on the roster. Mason Rudolph and Duck Hodges don't, stand out. My hope is next year all roads point to KJ Costello being our next guy. I don't know yet, but again, this is a draft that the Steelers really just filled needs, and especially in a year where Big Ben comes back, and there's a lot of promise and stuff. I was hoping to just try to re-up and reload. Like I said, some picks that were unnecessary, like other than Claypool, Dotson, Carlos Davis, and Antoine Brooks. I mean, some of them were a little bit of a waste. They're mostly developmental projects. My hope is that the Steelers, as we always do with late round picks, come in, make them what they are, and then hopefully get them. But some guys that didn't stand out, like Highsmith, who was just a speed guy, when you have Devin Bush for that, when you have T.J. Watt for that. So I just hope Kevin Colbert and the Rooneys know what they're doing, but I'm just not thrilled like in previous drafts.
Yeah. All right, let's move on to Cleveland now. So Cleveland, they went with Jedrick Wills with their first pick at 10. Then they get Grant Delpit in the second round, which I believe he was a pretty high pick to start out the mock draft process, and he fell to the second round. So a solid pickup there from Cleveland. They also get Jacob Phillips, his teammate at LSU, in the third. A solid draft, I would say, from Cleveland. Would you agree with that, Robert?
Yeah, definitely more than solid for me. I mean, they addressed their biggest issue this offseason, and that was offensive line. After adding so much offensive talent last year and having a really, really good defense, and then still failing to make the playoffs in typical Browns fashion, I mean, it all stems back to having a below average offensive line. They couldn't protect and give time to Baker Mayfield. So, I mean, they address it by getting, in my opinion, one of the top two offensive linemen that were available in the draft. And he was taken as such. Jedrick Wills is a great offensive lineman that you want to build your offensive line with. So I think that's a solid draft. So right off the bat, they got started great in this draft. The Delpit signing is great as well. They're another team that just doesn't have a lot of safety depth, and getting a guy like Grant Delpit in the second round like that, surprisingly, he fell that far, but that's a fantastic pick as well. And then some other, solid picks. I think Harrison Bryant was a nice pick. I'm surprised he fell that far. It is a backup to Austin Hooper. That Austin Hooper is not a great blocking tight end, and Harrison Bryant can be that guy that can block for you. So, that's a good backup tight end. And then I thought they got really good value in the sixth round with Donovan Peoples-Jones. I think Donovan Peoples-Jones is a really underrated wide receiver. And I think he's a nice depth piece that they can add to their wide receiver rotation. And I think they just had, the first two picks, they really knocked it out of the park. And anything after that was just them adding to a really, really solid opening to their draft.
Yeah, I think that, they really focused their offseason on the offensive line. They got Jack Conklin in free agency. They have a replacement. They have the long-term replacement now in the draft for J.C. Treader with Nick Harris, who they got, I believe, in the fifth round at the 160th pick. So they also have that. And, of course, Jedrick Wills is going to start right away. So that's two new tackles for you that were both top 10 picks. Hard to hate that draft, Okelo.
No, I agree. I think, for Andrew Berry's first draft as the GM of the Browns, I mean, he couldn't have been more happier. This draft, I think, was predicated not only on the success of filling the team's needs, but putting Baker Mayfield in the position to succeed. I think that the grade here is going to depend on how Baker Mayfield works this, and as well as what the Browns have done all free agency. I mean, Jedrick Wills, to me, I was surprised that he slid all the way to the 10th pick. I thought he would go to the Giants, be a top 4 pick, But, I mean, you couldn't ask for anything better. Cleveland also needed secondary help. I mean, Demarius Randall's gone, and, their secondary hasn't been that good. They weren't really that great last year. So to get Grant Delpit, I mean, a Jim Thorpe Award winner and a two-time All-SEC, I look forward to that. And, as Robert mentioned, Harrison Bryant, great blocking tight end. We don't know if David Njoku is going to be, healthy, or if he's going to, start back again. So, to get a blocking tight end like that, Nick Harris to be a guard. The only pick that, I'm questionable about is Donovan Peoples-Jones. I watched him at Michigan. He was decent, but it's just he had, hand involvement issues. So I'm kind of willing to see where the Browns are going to go with it. But other than that, I mean, Jordan Elliott, defensive lineman out of Missouri, they could have used a little more help out in the front. They struggled a little bit with that this year. And, linebacker Jacob Phillips, his teammate, I think this was a solid draft all around. But like I said, it's going to be how they produce on the field and how Baker Mayfield makes the most around the tools that he's been given.
Yeah, let's throw a grade on this one, guys. Okay, we'll start with you.
I'm going to give him an A. I think this is a solid A all around. The only way that this grade is going to drop is if Baker Mayfield digresses more in year 3 than in year 2. But for right now, Browns get an A off my book.
A for Okelo. Robert, what you got?
Yeah, I'm going to have to go exactly with Okelo there. It's an A. I mean, you addressed your biggest need with Jedrick Wills. You get Grant Delpit, and you added like I said, a good blocking tight end in Harrison Bryant. You added some wide receiver depth. They knocked it out of the park with this draft. They addressed exactly what they needed to address.
Yeah, you have 2 for sure starters in Wills and Delpit. I believe, I'm going to go 4.0. I'm going to go A's across the board. I'm going to give them A minus, though. I think that, I mean, it's hard to hate what they did in their first 2 rounds. So A minus for me. I'm not this draft didn't originally stand out to me as, oh my goodness, look at what the Browns did. But now that we've talked about it for a little bit, definitely one of the better drafts this year in the NFL. So the Browns get an A minus for me. So let's round out the AFC North by going to the AFC's number 1 seed from this past year. Another team that did very well in this draft, the Baltimore Ravens. They started out their draft with Patrick Queen from LSU. They go and they get J.K. Dobbins in the second, Justin Matabuki in the third, along with Devin Duvernay and Malik Harrison and Tyree Phillips. They had 4 third-round picks to round out this class. They had 4 day 3 picks, highlighted by James Prochet, wide receiver at SMU. They needed wide receiver, Robert, and they did that here with 2 wide receivers here in this draft. What did you think of Baltimore and what they did last week?
Yeah, I thought the rich got richer with this, with their draft. Already a contending Super Bowl team that underwhelmed a little bit in the playoffs last year, but they're just building on that. And getting Patrick Queen, I thought was great. I think that's a solid pick to get a linebacker like that to help build your defense even more. I love the J.K. Dobbins pick. I think a lot of people were shocked that J.K. Dobbins fell that low to them, that he just basically seemed like he was going to fall all the way to Miami, and then the Ravens take him the pick right before. And, they don't really need a running back, but, he's a solid one that you can add to your arsenal for Lamar Jackson. And then you give, Lamar Jackson wide receiver depth. You give him Devin Duvernay and you give him James Prochet. And I think both of those picks are great. Devin Duvernay out of Texas is great. I think, the fact that he went in the 3rd round, again, this is high value. It's a great pick. Same thing with James Prochet, the fact that he fell all the way to the 6th round. I think he can be a better talent than just a 6th round pick. And I think they're just adding to wide receiver depth. They're giving targets to Lamar Jackson, and they built their defense up a little bit too. And, they're going to be a great team for a long time to come. And this is why they draft so well and they build already on what their strengths are. So solid draft from them.
Yeah, okay, Lo, you cannot deny the potential that this 2020 draft class has from Baltimore.
No, I mean, like I said, Baltimore knocked it out of the park with their draft. I mean, they're definitely adding more to build for this team that is contending for a Super Bowl. And I can't lie. I mean, Devin Duvernay, a big steal. I loved him out of Texas. My question was, is he going to be a deep ball threat or are you going to put him in the slot? But either way, he's going to help out with their receiving core to add for Lamar Jackson. To me, what stood out was getting back-to-back guards in Tyree Phillips and Ben Brenson. Ben Brenson out of Michigan and Tyree Phillips out of Mississippi State, because, I felt they needed to address offensive line that Marshall Yanda retired. Mm-hmm. They got two guys. I was surprised that they did it in back-to-back. But again, they're going to have to see how it works out, how it plays out. Broderick Washington, they added more depth to the defense. I mean, the Ravens just did it again. I was, though, surprised about J.K. Dobbins because they didn't really need running back when you have Mark Ingram. But, who knows what the future could hold. I mean, Ingram is getting up there a little bit in age. Maybe the Ravens are looking towards the future a little bit, and maybe it could be one of the best running back tandems in the league next year. So I think that Baltimore did a great job. I mean, like I said, the two guards in back-to-back were a bit of a reach. They did needed to address it and help into the interior with Yanda gone. But, I mean, Baltimore's just ready to restock and reload. And, I hope they don't take the division away from my Steelers, but it looks like they're the consensus favorite right now.
Yeah, to me, it wasn't even the fact that there's Mark Ingram there. It's more of the fact that they have Gus Edwards and Justice Hill. And now you put J.K. Dobbins there, that's a very crowded backfield. If I'm J.K. Dobbins, as much as I'm excited to go to the Ravens because it's the Ravens and I can contend for a Super Bowl, I'm not as excited for, the fit for him because he could have gone to a team and been a 1,000-yard rusher this season. I think if he had gone to, say, the Rams 3 picks earlier, he could, instead of Cam Akers, he could have been a 1,000-yard rusher this season. But now he's going to Baltimore where there's a very crowded backfield. So for me, I don't like that pick for J.K. Dobbins. I like the pick for Baltimore, though. I think you continue to add depth to the running back room, and they what they did is they added depth in every single position in every single position. I mean, other than maybe tight end, obviously you lose Hayden Hurst, but you get that second round pick to draft J.K. Dobbins, I believe, because of Hayden Hurst. They got an extra second. I'm not sure if it was actually this year or if it maybe was even next year, but they have every other position that they have fulfilled. They probably had the deepest tight end room last year. So losing Hayden Hurst, you still have Mark Andrews and Nick Boyle. I think they're set at that position. They're really set at every position you can imagine. Patrick Queen is going to be a starter for them as well. So it's hard to hate this draft. I'm going to give this draft an A. I really do like this draft. They have every player I think on this draft has potential to make this team. In terms of, the stars who could be a star out of this class, you obviously look at Patrick Queen. I really like Matabuki out of A&M. I think that they needed defensive tackle help with Michael Pierce leaving. They bring him in, and I think he could even start right away. The only position I wish they had addressed more is defensive end. They brought in Calais Campbell, who is not going to be with the team long term. It's really only for this season, maybe even next. Derek Wolfe they brought in, I believe, only on a 1-year, 2-year deal as well. So I wish that they had addressed that position. But, hey, that's probably the position they're going to address first in the next draft when the need is even greater. So for me, it's an A from Baltimore. And the only thing that's keeping me from an A+ is not addressing defensive end. What do you think, Okelo?
They've built it around across the board. Like I said, my only questions were with the J.K. Dobbins pick and the back-to-back guards with Tyree Phillips and Ben Brenson. They're wild cards, but they should do well. But I can't lie with logic when I see it. The Ravens got good players that can come in, compete, become starters potentially and work hard in. I think they're going to get an A off of my book.
An A. Robert, we going A's across the board?
Yeah, we're going A's across the board.
Beautiful.
Like I said, the rich got richer. Ravens just added more and more strength to an already deep team. They're going to be scary for quite a few years to come. So do not expect them to fall off quite quickly.
Yeah. So the Ravens are scary. Another team that's scary? the reigning Super Bowl champion Kansas City Chiefs. They did not have as flashy of a draft as Baltimore did. They only had 6 picks, but they started off their draft with Clyde Edwards-Helaire at the bottom of the first. He was the first running back taken off the board. I think it was a big surprise to a lot of people. They also get Willie Gay Jr. out of Mississippi State. These were some questionable picks for me. But, I mean, Robert, we were very surprised seeing Clyde Edwards-Helaire go number 1. Why do you think they went with Edwards-Helaire over the other running backs that could have gone at 32?
Yeah, it was definitely shocking. I mean, I saw it and I was like, wow, Clyde Edwards went that high. I was like, everybody was convinced he was going to be a late second round pick. And I was shocked that they picked him that high. But, I think one of the reasons maybe they picked him is because he does arguably have the best hands of any of the running backs, meaning he's the best catcher of any of them. So what I think maybe the Chiefs are going to try to do is try to convert him not to a full-time wide receiver, but use him on those option plays where, you use him as a running back, but then you can just throw to him. And Mahomes, as dynamic of a quarterback as he is, that basically gives him another wide receiver if they need one. Mm-hmm. So I think it gives them a lot more screen options and stuff like that. It gives them a lot more plays that they can reach into the playbook and try to, throw teams off like that. I mean, it is a bit confusing because it's like, well, they don't really need a running back, and they certainly don't need, a running back that was not considered one of the top 4. But, given that he can catch balls very well, I think maybe that's what they're looking at. They're looking at sort of a dual threat there, and maybe it makes sense why they took him with that. So we'll have to see how they utilize him, but that could definitely be a reason why Andy Reid and the Chiefs took him at 32nd.
Yeah, Okelo, we talked about, Edwards-Helaire was a bit of a surprise, but the fact that he's so fast is probably the big reason why this makes a lot of sense for Kansas City.
They love to go speed. I mean, like, you have to look at Patrick Mahomes when he had Kareem Hunt, for example, and, the type of offense they were running. They were running, if not one of the fastest offense in football before, they had to cut him. So I think that when you look at the pick, which did surprise me, I thought the Chiefs would go for an elite running back, which was DeAndre Swift. I think they looked at Helaire as somebody who could be not only, as Robert said, in sort of that option play, but, come in as a starter, be almost an every down back, but especially in those third down situations when you want to have an all wide receiver set, have your running back out there in the option and go out fly, catch a fly pattern or an easy curl route when you need to and extra 10, 15 yards. So I think they built it on Helaire. Another guy with speed was Willie Gay Jr. out of Mississippi State. Mm-hmm. Now, this was a guy that ran a 4.46 at the combine. He has the type of athleticism that you need, especially to play the position at middle linebacker. My only concern was that the Chiefs didn't address their secondary as much, until the third round. I mean the fourth round, when they got L'Jarius Sneed out of Louisiana Tech. Kansas City with their draft class, it was a bit of like, and a little bit of, like, are you sure? Otherwise than that, like Lucas Niang out of TCU, another type of guy who's going to kind of just like fill in the depth. Mike Dana, an edge rusher, could definitely be of a help available. And then, to address the secondary help in Thacarius Keys, which I had him, nowhere, anywhere on any of my drafts prior. Kansas City, I think, is just going to, try to work with some of these guys. But, it's Andy Reid. How could you deny not only the Super Bowl winning championship head coach, but of all the progress that he's brought in great guys with players. So it's just a lot of development in my eyes that Kansas City has to work with.
Yeah, I think Willie Gay had some disciplinary issues in college, and I think that's ultimately why he fell to the second round. He has talent to be, high second round, possibly even late first. And they needed a linebacker because Reggie Ragland now plays for Detroit. They're starting linebacker from that Super Bowl winning team. So they needed to address that, and they did that. Maybe, and I think that if he can get past these disciplinary issues that he had in college, I think he could be a strong starter for them for years to come. I really like that pick in hindsight. Yeah, and you look at the players that you could have gotten instead. There really weren't a whole lot of linebackers taken until end of the third round. So they really took advantage, and I believe they traded up one spot to ensure that they got Willie Gay Jr. So that, in my opinion, is the best pick of this draft, and the pick that has the chance to be the best pick long term for them. I think Edwards-Helaire is a good pick, but I don't think that he is the 3 down back that we're all thinking. Yes, he had 1,800 yards from scrimmage last year, but he's seen as, I think they're going to use him more as a receiving back versus, and he's part of the backfield, and they're going to go a committee like they did last year. Except Edwards-Helaire is going to be more of your receiving back rather than Damian Williams. They're going to give Damian Williams more of those carries. So for me, I see Willie Gay as the jewel of this draft class that ultimately gets a B plus from me. I think that there are some strong pieces. I think that Edwards-Helaire and Willie Gay Jr. are going to be vital pieces for this team moving forward. You could even make the argument that Lucas Niang could work his way into the starting lineup in a year or two. I'm not a huge fan of the day 3 picks. I don't think that they make a whole lot of sense. L'Jarius Sneed, I think, is good safety depth, but I don't think he's going to be like a star in the league. So for me, it's a B plus from Kansas City. What do you think? What do you think, Okelo?
You mentioned, you hit the hammer hard on this one, Jeremy. Like you said, some guys that are going to be questionable, and as well as guys that could fit in long term, but it's just a matter of how they progress and stuff. And especially day 3, not a lot of great picks in my mind. When they could have addressed them earlier, especially the secondary help. Mike Dana, like I said, I think a great player. I think he fit in around. I thought he would be an late 4th round, early 5th round pick. It's going to likely hurt Kansas City in the long run and comes to the playoffs. They do have a great, chance, but for me in this draft, I got to give them a B minus just based off of the surprise of the picks and, just how Andy Reid is going to develop them is going to be the huge impact on how great they are long term.
Mm-hmm. Robert, what are you thinking?
Yeah, I'm going to have to give them a B. I agree with the Willie Gay pick. I like that pick. I think it's the standout of their draft. Clyde Edwards was a reach at the 32nd pick, but it's such a high first-round pick that you're not really kicking yourself. And the fact that, they're definitely not going to use him as an every down back. They're going to use him more as that wide receiving option at running back. It makes sense for their style of offense. So I think it's a good fit for them, maybe not necessarily for a team that needs an every down back, but they're not that kind of team. So, nothing really outside of those two, and maybe even Lucas Niang. I think, he's a good tackle, but outside of that, I wasn't overall impressed with their draft outside of those 3. So that's why it would rank that low for me.
Mm-hmm. So let's move on to Denver. The Denver Broncos, they stressed wide receiver hard, going both wide receiver at round 1 with Jerry Jeudy and round 2 with KJ Hamler. Then they even got Tyree Cleveland late in the 7th, just for safe measures. They really needed to address wide receiver, and they did that. They also get some solid pieces on the defensive side of the ball with Michael Ojemudia in the 3rd, also getting McTelvin Agim in the 3rd. I really like this draft from Denver. I think that they got the best receiver in the draft in Jerry Jeudy. They got a nice, KJ Hamler could also work his way into the starting lineup, I feel, because that's how thin the Broncos were at wide receiver. It was really Cortland Sutton, and then it was a big drop compared to the rest of the running back wide receivers they had on their roster. And to pair that with with one of the deepest running back rooms in the league, I think that this was a very good draft for Denver in terms of placing talent around their new franchise quarterback, Drew Lock. Robert, what are we thinking about Denver's draft?
No, yeah, exactly like you said. Their biggest need was clearly wide receiver. We knew they were going to take one of the wide receivers. I think John Elway was very surprised that Jerry Jeudy fell right into his lap. I think a lot of people had Jerry Jeudy either going to the Raiders or even the Jets. But with those teams, with the Raiders taking uh, uh, oh my god, names escaping me. Oh my god,
Henry
I just had it
Ruggs.
in my head. Yeah, Henry Ruggs. Yeah, I thought the Broncos were going to take Henry Ruggs. So I'm surprised that he fell all that way, but it gives them a deep threat. It gives them an explosive talent that they can put alongside a speedy receiver like Cortland Sutton. And the same thing with KJ Hamler, that's another guy you can give to Drew Lock, who this is how you build around a quarterback outside of building the offensive line, which they did add to the offensive line by getting a very good center in Lloyd Cushenberry. I think building around your quarterback means giving him wide receivers and giving him options. And, John Elway and the Broncos clearly feel that Drew Lock is their starting quarterback of the future. So now it's time to build around him. And by giving him two legit receivers, especially a top receiver like Jeudy, you have a great draft just based on giving your quarterback those options.
Yeah, I really, they clearly address wide receiver, but Okelo, they also address the defensive side of the ball. What do you think about the defensive picks that Denver had?
Solid. I mean, all across the board. I mean, Denver lost a lot of great pieces, losing Derek Wolfe and Chris Harris Jr. I mean, to get Michael Ojemudia, who's I think was one of my favorite underrated cornerbacks coming out of Iowa, definitely fits into the scheme that Vic Fangio wants to run in his 3-4 defense. And I think I wouldn't say he's not necessarily a lockdown corner, but I think he's a solid corner that's going to transcend well and, make the plays necessary to be able to create opportunities for your defense. And I mean, they addressed the front, McTelvin Agim out of Arkansas. I definitely love the pick. To me, though, I was surprised a little bit that Justin Strnad was their pick in the fifth round. I mean, when that linebacker depth is already loaded. But then again, when you have Von Miller and Bradley Chubb playing both sides in terms of linebacker and defensive end, I kind of see where you go with that pick just to give them a little bit of breathing room. And Derek Stukaza out of North Dakota State, definitely a guy I hadn't heard of much. I watched some film on him. I think he's definitely somewhat of a project, but he could progress well if he becomes a starter. Denver fixed the holes on their defense. John Elway in previous drafts has always been a hit or miss, especially a huge miss in the later rounds. Because he always seems to get the best in the first rounds, like in previous years, Noah Fant, Bradley Chubb. So I think that he gets the best depth value that he's probably had as a GM for the Broncos. And I just look forward. Again, this is all things to help Drew Lock, to help Vic Fangio in year two. There's some excitement around Colorado, and I think the Mile High City is definitely going to feel a little bit higher now that that all these picks came in to help elevate the Broncos out of the basement a little bit.
Absolutely. So, Okelo, if we got to put a grade on this, what grade are we giving Denver and John Elway for this draft?
Ooh, man, it went both ways for me, but I'm going to give the Broncos an A+ on this draft.
A+ for the Broncos.
Yes,
Interesting.
because like I said, I love the wide receivers they got. To think that Jerry Jeudy fell right into the hands of John Elway, and the fact that they got KJ Hamler. And I know what John Elway's thinking. This is just like how he had it old school in Denver with Rod Smith, Shannon Sharp, Ed McCaffrey, and them. You're going to have two wide receivers out as fly, and then you have your slot receiver, which I think Jeudy and Sutton is your X, and then Hamler's your slot. He's your Y. And then, Lloyd Cushenberry addressed an offensive line help that they needed. That Glasnow left. I think Cushenberry, to me, was, if not one of the best offensive line in the draft. No disrespect to the class, but I think if you look at the second tier, Cushenberry could have definitely been if you look second, third round, a type 1A, 1B type player. I think Albert, I'll get, I hope I pronounced this right. Okabunam, yes, Albert Okabunam. A surprise there, but they could use a bit of blocking help. Noah Fant is an athletic tight end. He's a more pass catcher than he is a blocker. That's definitely going to help. I love John Elway's picks across the board. Again, the best draft depth-wise that he's had in a while, and it's definitely going to help the Broncos potentially get into the wild card spot this year.
Yeah. Robert, A+ for you, or are you going elsewhere?
No, it's definitely in the A region. I'm gonna just say A-. I think they got it right with Judy and Hamler. Like I said, those are two options that you give your starting quarterback, and John Elway knocked it out of the park with that. I thought that was great. I like the Lloyd Cushenberry as well. That draft as well. I think that's you build your offensive line to make sure that your quarterback is protected. So on the offensive side of the ball, they did everything right, and I think on the defensive side of the ball, they did everything right there as well. So a solid draft for them. I don't know, how competitive they'll be, but they should be much better than last year. They're doing a good job to finally build around potentially a starting quarterback of the future. And, they're hoping that they got it right with Drew Lock, and it shows that they have full trust in him by putting these wide receivers and this offensive talent around him.
I think that this is going to put more pressure on Drew Lock, to be honest, because now it's more pressure to succeed, in my opinion. I think that they have their team is better now. Their team is a lot better now than they were this time a year ago, this time 3 months ago. And I think they're gonna give Drew Lock the keys to the offense, and he's got to, lock it down. Hey, they should use that, and I should get 25% of every time it is used. Lock it down. Denver locked it down in this draft. They get an A- from me. I think that giving Drew Lock his receiving threats was obviously huge, but you also get Lloyd Cushenberry could be a starter for them moving forward. McTelvin Agim, I think, could also be a starter for them moving forward. That's 4 starters in this draft. And then the rest of the depth pieces they got also very crucial. So to get 4 starters in one draft is to get 2 starters in one draft is impressive. To get 4 is exceptional, and that's an A for Denver. So 4.0s across the board for Denver. But let's move on to a team that we probably aren't going to give a lot of A's to, the Las Vegas Raiders. Their first draft as the Las Vegas Raiders came up with probably 2 of the bigger surprises in that first round by taking Henry Ruggs 12th overall as the top receiver off the board. And they also took Damon Arnett, cornerback out of Ohio State, 19th overall. A big surprise there. They also get 2 wide receivers in the 3rd round, on top of getting Henry Ruggs in the first, with Lynn Bowden out of Kentucky and Brian Edwards out of South Carolina. Robert, did this draft leave you? Give me a word to describe this draft for you, for Las Vegas.
Clemson.
That's a good word. That's a good word. They got 2 Clemson guys. Tanner Muse and John Simpson in just 9 picks apart. So yeah, that's a good word.
Yeah, they love their Clemson talent. I really felt that Las Vegas stretched with their first pick. I mean, Ruggs is very good. Ruggs is also the fastest receiver in the draft, but compared to Judy and Lamb, I don't see it there. I mean, Judy and Lamb are clearly better from their tape, and Ruggs was a stretch to start off with, and the rest of the picks, the 2 Clemson picks are nice, but I don't see it with them. The Raiders draft was very underwhelming to me. They started with a stretch, and it kind of ended with just not a lot of huge names, and we'll have to see what happens with the Raiders. But yeah, I'm not feeling overly confident with the Raiders draft in their first season away from Oakland.
Yeah, Okelo, we knew that wide receiver was a need for these Raiders, but to get 2 in the first 3 rounds, possibly 3 if you count Lynn Bowden as a wide receiver. I mean, what did you think of the Raiders going very wide receiver heavy in those first 2 days?
I was just as surprised as anybody. I mean, look, they do need wide receiver help. I mean, other than Tyrell Williams, they didn't really have much of any guys. They went with a lot. I was surprised about Las Vegas. I can't say Oakland anymore. Picks and stuff, especially Henry Ruggs. But then again, this is the classic type Raiders pick where they predicate these guys on speed. And I think, if you know John Gruden, you know Mike Mayock, or you know the history of the Raiders, they love speed. Speed kills for them. But to me, these are picks that are too much question marks and a little bit of can they produce? This to me was not a great pick. Mike Mayock and John Gruden have done it again, not only in terms of giving us question marks, picking guys I think who've played in the last couple national championship games, but also just doing picks that just seem way out of bounds for them in terms of giving the best support for Derek Carr and for that team to compete, where 2 years ago they were once upon a time a predicate Super Bowl contender, to we don't know what this team is going to be. They did address, I think, the defensive side of the ball, getting Tanner Muse out of Clemson. I think that out of most of those picks, I think that was a solid pick. But other than that, just it left me speechless. And John Gruden, Mike Mayock, they just better hope that it's at least like the first time they draft together where they at least got 2 home runs in the first round when they had Jonathan Abram and Josh Jacobs. So it'll just be predicate to see how they succeed in gambling country.
Yeah, so the Raiders have had a history of picking guys that aren't necessarily guys that they that fit where they're supposed to go. And this draft was absolutely no exception. The Henry Ruggs, probably not who most teams would have taken at 12th overall, especially with Jerry Jeudy and CeeDee Lamb on the board. But they still took Henry Ruggs anyway because that's the guy they wanted. And same thing with Damon Arnett. Damon Arnett probably not a first round pick in the eyes of most, but it was in the eyes of the Raiders. So they did what they wanted to do. They didn't really care about what other people thought. They did what they wanted to do. And a team like the Raiders that had such a good offseason in terms of free agency, they got Corey Littleton, they got Jeff Heath, they got Malik Collins, they have Carl Nassib. They added so many pieces in free agency and we were very impressed with their free agency. Not as impressed here with their draft because while I think that Henry Ruggs has the chance to be a star, I don't think it's as much of a slam dunk as Jerry Jeudy or CeeDee Lamb. And I think if you wanted to go for speed, CeeDee Lamb also had that. But to me, Derek Carr is still the face of the team. Derek Carr is still the bread and butter that this team is going to, this team is either going to live by Derek Carr or die by Derek Carr. And to me, I'm worried because I consider Derek Carr to be the third or fourth best quarterback in this division, and I still don't think that. I think you got him some weapons that he needed, and hopefully that will. Hopefully he'll respond to that. But I'm still not sold totally on the Raiders, and this draft did not do that for me. So I'm going to give them a B- just because I don't hate these picks. I don't think they're bad picks. I think that Arnett could be a starter long term for the Raiders. I think that Henry Ruggs could be a starter long term for the Raiders. I just think they could have done better with this draft. They could have gone for a triple, but they stayed at second with the double, and they were okay with that. What do you think, Okelo?
I'm going to be very critical on the Raiders here because these are once again quintessential draft day drama that the Raiders love to create. Like you said, I don't necessarily hate these picks, but the Raiders could have done better. Like I mentioned, Lynn Bowden Jr. What I think the Raiders are trying to get is that type of slash type player because he does remind me a little bit, if I have to go old school Steelers, Antoine Randall and Cordell Stewart. But to me, with the limited amount that they had just going from round 1 through 4, they're going to have a tough time to try to make these guys starters, not only maybe this year but in the years to come. This could look dumb or generous in a couple of years, depending on how they work it. But to me right now, I'm going to probably give the first bad grade of this draft. I'm going to give the Raiders a D+.
D+ for the Raiders. Yikes. Robert, what are we thinking?
Yeah, I don't think I'll go that low. I'll go C+. I do like the Ruggs pick, even though it is a bit of a stretch. If they feel speed, is the way they need to go with that offense. If it works, it works. But, it is a stretch nonetheless. And like I said, nothing really else, even if there are starters, nothing really screams out at you that this is going to be a more competitive team next season. And I don't think this is a draft that we look, especially comparing to some of the other AFC teams that we've already talked about. I mean, it's very underwhelming compared to some of those other drafts. And it was a very deep draft. And nothing really just screams to me that this is going to make huge changes to that Raiders team, especially when they have to win over a brand new fan base next year. So it's not a great draft, not a horrible draft either. The picks are decent, but nothing that really says that they're going to be explosive or anything like that. It's a bang average draft.
Mm-hmm.
And so the greatness of the Raiders just in Vegas, just on 3 Super Bowls alone, they expect better. And I don't think they're selling Vegas yet on them being competitive like the city is.
Mm-hmm. Let's round out this division here with the Chargers, who took a big step towards the future of their franchise by drafting their quarterback of the future, 6th overall, in Justin Herbert. They also traded back in the first round to get Kenneth Murray from Oklahoma, but then they didn't have a pick on day 2 because they traded their day 2 picks to move back in to get Kenneth Murray. So they got, but then they decided to surround their new quarterback with some weapons. They got Joshua Kelly from UCLA, gets to play not too far from where he played college ball, and Joe Reed from Virginia, KJ Hill from Ohio State. They also had Alohi Gilman, the safety out of Notre Dame. So, Justin Herbert, there was a lot of debate between Herbert and Tua. Tua was taken at 5, so Herbert at 6 was the pick for the Chargers. What do you think about Herbert and what he can provide for LA?
Yeah, I've been very vocal that I'm not sold at all on Justin Herbert. I don't see it with him. I see a big arm, a big frame, but a slightly more athletic Sam Darnold. I think it's just that similar build, and that's what's attracted a lot of these teams. The accuracy just isn't there yet. He's either going to throw you a really nice pass and you say, wow, that's an NFL-style pass. And then he's going to throw another one where it looks like Jameis Winston, where he throws a huge interception. It's like, wow, why would he make that kind of pass? What is he doing? And it's just there's too much discrepancy between, being a consistent, accurate thrower and having a cannon of an arm. I mean, he just doesn't have the accuracy to match how strong his arm is. And that's going to be a huge liability for him. Now, certainly, the Chargers can build him up. Certainly the Chargers can try to fix him there. He's not dealing with neglecting injury issues where you have to put a question mark next to that. But, it is still a huge question mark on his skill level. And being the 6th overall pick, I mean, they definitely needed to go quarterback because they lost Phillip Rivers and Tyrod Taylor's their only other option at quarterback. So it's just not there for them. So it made sense why they picked Herbert. But, I mean, I think it shows how outside of, a healthy Tua and outside of a Joe Burrow, this draft was just not very deep in quarterback. And I think it shows that Justin Herbert's a top 10 pick in this draft, and he's arguably on a lot of teams not a starting quarterback.
Yeah. Okelo, outside of Herbert, though, which picks did we like from the Chargers?
I like the Kenneth Murray pick. I think, they got him for a steal. Now, it did take a lot of guts on the Chargers to trade away day 2 picks and banking on day 3 to really progress with your starters. And that is a huge hit or miss and a crapshoot right there. But, I think they solidified a good linebacking core. And like I said, this is another team that definitely needed a little bit of help, especially when you have Melvin Ingram, who's a hybrid, who's a linebacker and defensive end. That definitely, takes away a little bit off the pressure of him, and Murray can come in, become maybe the future MLB linebacker, middle linebacker, and, progress into the pick. Other than some of these picks, I'm not really as high on some of these guys to really be potential starters. Like KJ Hill, for example, out of Ohio State, he was nothing really, as panache or as anything, or even Joe Reed from Virginia. I think Alohi Gilman is a decent, solid enough pick you get out of Notre Dame, and then Joshua Kelly to be at least a good backup, a good student behind Austin Eckler, who is going to be their number 1 back. But to me, the Chargers just didn't really do anything, and especially the big risk of losing day 2 picks, which were the big value of this draft, is costly. Los Angeles put themselves in a very risky position here, and and again, this goes back as well with Justin Herbert, and it's gonna be really interesting to see how these pan out for Los Angeles.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at where the Chargers are coming from, the defensive backs that they have are outstanding, and I think if they stay healthy, they're going to be solid. The linebacker core, they get a long term starter in Kenneth Murray, which I think is fantastic. Great. I think the trade was definitely worth it. Because honestly, the Chargers didn't have a whole lot of needs, but they satisfied the needs that they did. They got a quarterback that they can build around. They have the weapons at wide receiver from past with Keenan Allen, Mike Williams. They get KJ Hill, who I actually think could factor into. I think he could factor into the rotation a little bit. I think he's that talented. He's from Ohio State. Ohio State has a talent factory. So I imagine KJ Hill will could have a chance as a late round pick to factor into the wide receiver core that they have. And if you look at the front seven is probably, I mean, other than Kenneth Murray, they didn't really look and solve any of the issues that they've had there. They really honestly just have to hope they stay healthy. They get Linval Joseph in free agency. They had a big free agency, and I think that's why they were willing to take risks in the draft, because they have solid pieces that they've had in free agency. The offensive line, I wish they had gotten a guy on the offensive line that they could have seen as someone who could be a long-term option. They did get Brian Balaga, so they did help that in free agency. I think, though, they needed to get one more guy. They get Trey Turner as well, so they were probably satisfied with a lot of their free agency picks, which is why they opted to trade some draft picks to move up to get Kenneth Murray. And I think that Kenneth Murray is going to be the best player out of this class for the Chargers. So for me, I'm going to give the Chargers a B+. I really like what they've done with Murray. And that's the big reason why this. I think if without Murray, this is actually probably like a C+. He brings them up that high. A B+ for me for the Chargers. What do you guys think?
I'll start off. I gotta go at least. I'm gonna say a solid C+, just because of the predicate that the Chargers did give up a lot to get Kenneth Murray, and that does apply a lot of pressure, Jeremy, when you think about it. That the franchise gave up, I think, if not one of the deepest draft class in round 2 and round 3 and day 2 to get you. That means they're expecting a lot out of you to be somewhat of the future. I'm hoping they don't put as pressure on him to be the next Junior Seau or to do what Melvin Ingram does times 8. But, I think he is going to be a solid player. Justin Herbert is a project. Like I said, I'm worried about him, as Robert mentioned, because he's hot and cold, and as well as the fact that he falls into the Oregon first-round quarterback curse with Joey Harrington, Mariota, Achilles Smith, Chris Miller, list goes on. And, and just some of these picks are questionable when they have enough depth to do it. To predicate these guys on as a starter, they basically have what they had in free agency and getting what they needed. These were just kind of we really just needed these two, and then everything else is a wild card. So for there, I got to give the Chargers a C+ on that.
C+ from Okelo. What are we thinking, Robert?
Yeah, I think I'm going to give him a B here. I don't want to just harp on Justin Herbert because I think they did have good picks outside of him. So even though he would bring down my grade a bit, they did address the need of quarterback, so that at least is a move that they needed to make. I thought trading up for Kenneth Murray made a lot of sense too. It's another solid linebacker that they add to that defense, and it's already a really strong defense going forward. And getting Kenneth Murray in the first round almost makes up for the fact that they, did lose out on their day 2 talent. So that hurts a bit not having, a second and third round pick, but Kenneth Murray pretty much makes up for that. Joshua Kelly's a decent ad there as well out of UCLA. And I think for us being a 7th round pick, I think KJ Hill is actually really, really good value for being a 7th round pick. I think he could be a guy that could have went a lot higher in the draft. So, I think they had a solid draft outside of, my disagreements on Herbert. But, it's going to be interesting to see what they do forward. I mean, they certainly all are a well-built team for a team that had to pick in the top 10. I mean, they are a little bit better going forward, I think.
Mm-hmm. Well, we got a lot of different opinions across the board, but let's see if we can agree on what Miami did in their draft. The only team to get 3 first-round picks out of this draft. They get Tua Tagovailoa with number 5, Austin Jackson, tackle with number 18, and Noah Igbenogany with number 30. And that was 3 of their, I believe, 10 or 11 draft picks. 11 draft picks for Miami. One of the deeper classes for the 2020 draft. Robert, you're a Miami guy. I'll let you take this one. What did you think of Miami's draft?
I said it on draft day. Give me Tua or give me death. They gave everybody in Dolphins.
That's why you're still here.
Exactly. Exactly.
You made it.
Tua is such a good quarterback that I think it made sense that he still went top 5 given, the injury issues. It's fair to say that if he was fully healthy and there wasn't the hip concern, he would have been first overall, or at least in the same breath as Burrow for going first overall. I think they addressed every need they needed to in this draft. They got their quarterback. Austin Jackson was the 5th best offensive tackle on the board. They took him. I'm a USC fan. I grew up a USC fan, so I've watched Austin Jackson most of his career. He's 20 years old. He is a project. He's not a guy that you're going to expect to be explosive on the offensive line this year, but they're drafting for Tua. Tua is expected to start in 2 years. So if you can build Austin Jackson up to being an NFL, pro like that, I think his ceiling is very, very high. And he's only 20 years old, compared to Robert Hunt, who they took in the second round, who's 22, and he's already, I think a great pick as well. I thought the Noah Igbenogany draft was great as well. They're taking guys with last names that it's going to be impossible to pronounce.
Yeah.
But, he's a great option for that secondary. Putting him in likely the nickel, putting him at nickel corner, I think is going to be great. Putting him with Jones and Xavier Howard, I think is great. He's a solid draft pick. And then I look at arguably the steal of the draft was them taking Curtis Weaver. Curtis Weaver was leading the Mountain West Conference in sacks all time now. I believe I saw this stat right here. He is 5th all time in NCAA history with 34 sacks, and he did that in just 3 seasons. So his shape is a little bit of concern. They are worried about his athleticism a little bit, but he's got all the technical aspects of his game down. And for a 5th round pick, a lot of people thought he could be 2nd or 3rd. I think that's your steal of the draft right there. He's going to be a stud, I think, on that defense.
Yeah, I'm not sure if this stat is legit or not, but it's, I believe, the only team to draft 3 or more guys with last names of 11 letters or longer, or 10 letters or longer. So yeah. What grade are you going to give Miami? Right there, Robert.
For me, it's got to be an A. They addressed every need. I think even other moves where people were a little bit more debating on, like Raekwon Davis. Even though he had questionable aspects in college, he's built like a monster. He's got all the athletic talent down for a defensive tackle. He's huge. And then there was other picks like Jason Strowbridge. Solid, I think. And for me, it has to be an A. They took a safety. They took, Igbenogany and all that. They built their secondary. They definitely paid attention to offensive line, which was their biggest concern. And I think one thing that does not show up in their draft board is Matt Breida. They addressed running back, great value. And, putting him at running back next year with Jordan Howard, I think, is the next best thing to taking a top running back.
Yeah. Okelo, what do you think about Miami's draft? Give him a grade.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Okelo, give him a
connection,
grade.
I guess, was that?
Give Miami a grade. What's your grade for Miami?
Okay. I'm sorry. Connection must have been shaky.
Mm-hmm.
I think I hate to damper a little bit because some of these picks were reaches. I think, for Curtis Weaver to fall, as Robert mentioned, was a bit of a surprise, especially considering how great he was at Boise State. And they got Tua. They got the pieces that they need, some guys that they're going to build around. I think Raekwon Davis, despite the question marks, I think he could be an impact day one starter. And I think for a defensive-minded coach, like Brian Flores this is somebody that he's going to love to play around and work with in terms of getting to where they need to be. Some of these guys are reaches, but then again, this is the Dolphins rebuilding. This is something that's going to be a project to work on. But I think Chris Greer and them are making the great moments. Everybody in South Beach, I know from my perspective, where I'm from, love it. So A- for me.
Yeah, I'm gonna give them an A- as well. I really like what they've done. They have a lot of potential for these guys to pan out, especially with the thing is though this is going to rely on Tua Tagovailoa, and if he can, I think if he doesn't work out, it's gonna put Miami back even further. And I'm nervous about it. I'm nervous about whether or not Tua can stay healthy. It's not the hip issue that concerns me. It's the fact that he had more than just a hip injury. It seemed like he was always injured with a nick there or a knock there, and those do add up. Those do add up, and I hope for Tua's sake and I hope for Miami's sake that they that he is successful in Miami. So I'm gonna give it an A- just because I'm not totally sold on the Tua pick. But I think it was the right decision for what they needed and for what they had to do. So A- for Miami. So let's move on now to the New England Patriots, who look very different after this draft. Obviously, no Tom Brady on the roster for the first time since the 1999, right? 2000. He was in the 2000 draft, so 1999 was the last year he was not on the Patriots roster, and they did not decide to go and draft a quarterback. To many people's surprise, but they did go out and they did not have a first round pick, but they had 2 seconds. They traded back with the Chargers. They get Kyle Duggar from a D2 school, Lenore Ryan, with their first pick. They get Josh Uche with the second pick in their second round. They get 2 tight ends in the third, a kicker in the fifth, and 2 guards in the sixth. Very interesting draft here from the Patriots. Okay, what are your thoughts?
This is a quintessential Bill Belichick draft, Jeremy. Look, it was a surprise that they didn't get a quarterback. I really thought in previous draft boards, I had Jalen Hurts other than possibly going to Pittsburgh to New England because I thought he would fit them right away and he could be a quarterback to build for the future. But, Bill Belichick stuck to his guns. He really addressed, I think, some needs with getting a kicker to replace Steven Gostkowski. He got 2 tight ends, Devin Asai and Dalton Keeney. 2 guys that I think could work out as potentially. This could be like when they had the 2 tight ends with Gronk and Hernandez back in 2010. Mm-hmm. So I think that Bill Belichick has done what he's needed to do. It is strange, but then again, this is the Patriots. They're known for getting a lot of guys who come in and sort of these questionable picks and turn to pan out to be okay. So I'm not going to discredit a genius who's won 6 Super Bowls and if not is the greatest head coach of all time. So I think he's going to develop them well, and I think they're going to be good.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of, Robert, for me, I thought that, they needed defensive help. And, they had, I believe, 10 picks in this draft? Yeah, 10 picks in this draft. And they went, 3 defensive guys with their first 4 picks. Or they went 4 defense and 6 offense. 3 of those guys being on the offensive line. For me, I thought this was a strange draft for New England. But what is one pick that you really like?
I honestly think it's between Kyle Duggar and Josh Uche. I think Duggar, the comparisons with him, he's just like a freak athlete. Like he's built to be.
He would have been a first round pick if he played D1.
Yeah, I mean he's a nice pick, I think, and they're already saying maybe he could be like the next Patrick Chung or something like that. And if you can get that out of him, out of the second round, I mean that's really good upside. I mean Patrick Chung is great, and so even when people are like, why would they take him? I mean, this is the one team where even when you doubt their pitch, you're kind of like, well, they could still pan out pretty well. I mean, it is Bill Belichick and the Patriots. And I really like, in addition to Kyle Duggar, I like the Josh Uche draft. I think, getting another linebacker out of Michigan to put next to, Chase Winovich, who was probably going to start next year, giving him some familiarity at linebacker from a guy that he's played with before, I think is a big thing. And you can, develop further chemistry there at linebacker. And so I think that's a solid pick as well. Definitely you go down the rest of that list and you see, a lot of guys where it's maybe reaches or you kind of don't know a lot about them. But, they did address a lot of the needs at offensive line, on defense, and they even needed a kicker. So, I mean, they are addressing their needs, just maybe not the players that a lot of people expected them to take. But I think, it is the Patriots. It can still very much pan out.
Yeah. To me, I don't care who you are, you never, ever, ever draft a kicker. It's a cardinal sin in my book. Because, well, the thing is, majority, if not, like 75, 80% of kickers, I would say, and that's probably generous, but 75 to 80% of kickers are undrafted. And that's just a position that, you just accept the fact that, you're either undrafted, some of them are 7th round picks. I mean, look, you look at Roberto Aguayo from 2 years ago. He was a 2nd round pick, and he lasted 1 season. So you wasted a 2nd round pick on a guy that didn't even last longer than a season. So, like, to me, that is a quintessential example of why you don't draft kickers. And to me, even if Rohrwasser is great, he was not on this board when I inserted him in. I inserted him in as the top kicker because he was drafted in the 5th round. So clearly he's got a leg. But so do a whole bunch of other guys. Blankenship, I think he was the only kicker other than, I think, Tyler Bass, who went to Buffalo, who we'll talk in a sec about. But the thing is, you can get kickers in the draft. You can get kickers, from the CFL. Kickers can kick. That's it. Dylan Barnes was kicking 60s on Twitter the other day. Why doesn't he get a call? Like, to me, I feel like a kicker, you could have used that pick to get a wide receiver or a quarterback or any position other than kicker. Like, to me, I just didn't understand it at all. To me, and the thing is, even if Rohrwasser's the best kicker of, like a Justin Tucker, great kicker, it's still, like, the difference between Rohrwasser, like, and Tucker, the difference is between an undrafted player and a drafted player, there's not too much. So to me, I thought that was a waste of a pick. And, I think that there are guys that can pan out. I think there's a chance that either Keene or Asi works out for them. I think there's a chance that either Onwenu or Heron works out for them. But I can't see both tight ends working out for them. I can't see both guards working out for them. They needed to address, in my opinion, they needed to address receiver. They didn't do that. They needed to address quarterback. Not necessarily to start, but they needed to get at least somebody. They got Brian Lewerke from Michigan State as in undrafted free agency. So maybe he puts himself in the mix there. It looks like to me Jarrett Stidham is the guy, at least for this season. So good for them. Good for him. The last game he started was against UCF and he lost. So I just wanted to point that out. I really like the Kyle Duggar pick though, and I think that there are picks from this draft that could factor into their plans long term. So I will give them a B- because I do think there are some good picks here. I just think that there was so much more potential for this draft to be better than what it was. Similar to Las Vegas. And obviously, yes, Bill Belichick knows a lot more about football than I do. So I'm not going to discredit them. I'm sure he knows what he's doing, and I'm sure that he had a reason for every single guy that he drafted. But the thing is, you can only play 2 guards in a field. Why are you drafting 2 guards in the 6th round? You can only get, 1 center. You can only get, yes, you can have 2 tight end sets, but, I mean, why are you going to draft 2 tight ends 10 picks apart when, to me, I just didn't understand these picks. So that's why I give a B-. Just a lot of potential that, was unseen. So B- for me. What do you think, Robert?
I'm gonna have to go way lower than that. Actually, I think it's a C-. I think Duggar and Uche are the ones that are holding that up. Even though, like I was saying, that they did draft towards more of their needs. Like you said, Jeremy, no wide receiver, taking a kicker in a top 5 round. It's just not a it's a weird strategy by them. And the fact that there was no wide receivers taken in a very deep wide receiver draft, the fact that they traded back their first round pick just to get into the second round, it's just very, very confusing all around from the Patriots. But, do we still doubt them? No. I mean, it could work out. I think it shows by taking the two tight ends, 10 picks apart. I think it shows how desperate they are to get it right at tight end, because they know how, dependent they've been offensive wise on the tight end in the past, especially when they had Gronkowski. But I don't know. I just don't, outside of the first two picks, I just don't see anything that wows me here. And I think they've had the weakest draft out of the teams we've talked about so far.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know. It's going to be very strange for the Patriots going forward. I mean, they clearly believe Stidham's the guy. They didn't take Jacob Eason. A lot of people thought they would. A lot of people thought they could take Jake Fromm or even Jalen Hurts, and they didn't take any of them. So, I mean, Stidham seems like he's their guy, and, for their sake, hopefully it works out.
Mm-hmm. Okay, what grade are you giving them?
Well, before I give a grade, I just gotta say, my guys, like, all this hate on Rawwasser and stuff with kickers, man. I mean, like, look, I know kickers are a bit of a reach to get in draft, and they're expendable. But I mean, we've seen some kickers that have gone higher that have done great. Sebastian Janikowski, Nick Foles had a long career. So I'm just saying, guys, just don't hate on the kickers. I thought Rawwasser was a good kick. Patriots really just re-upped and reload. Other than Uche and Kyle Duggar, like I said, I thought the tight end thing was smart. They definitely did need some help on it. Some of these picks are questionable, as Jeremy mentioned. I mean, you get bat-to-bat offensive linemen in the sixth round. But, it's just going to be those type of things where I'm just going to let Bill Belichick do what Bill Belichick does. It is questionable when you do address Tanala needs. But then again, this is a team that's going to, I think, maybe look towards next year as their it year to really get what they want, and then hopefully take it from there. And then Brian Lewerke as their quarterback to fill in. I wasn't really surprised. In this draft grade, I'm going to just give them a C right here. I think, it's strange. It makes sense. And then at the same time, it's all going to predicate on how they develop and how they become what they become long term. Mm-hmm. Getting in back-to-back slots is risky, but, I think that they could be something there. And I think Bill Belichick is going to not make the Patriots look as bad as what people think they might be, but just expect some of these picks to be okay at best, in my opinion.
Yeah. All right. So now let's move on to the Buffalo Bills, who get an automatic A+ from me by drafting the only UCF player that was drafted in the draft with Gabe Davis with the 128th overall pick. So that's all we need to discuss. A+ for the Bills. But I guess we'll talk about the rest of the class if we have to. They get AJ Epinesa with their first pick in the second round. They did not have a first round pick as they traded it to Minnesota to get Stephon Diggs to be a great wide receiver too for Gabriel Davis. So no, I'm joking. But they get Zach Moss in the third round. I thought that was a great pick. Jake Fromm in the fifth round, which that was kind of the story of day 3, is how far is Jake Fromm going to fall. I found an article from Bleacher Report. It was Matt Miller's way too early predictions that was written April 29th, 2019, so a year ago, a year and a day. And he had Jake Fromm going 4th overall to the Bengals. So, I mean, the Bengals were the number 1 pick and they needed a quarterback, and Matt Miller thought it was going to be Jake Fromm a year ago, and he went not the first round. He went 167th overall instead of 4th overall. So crazy drop for him. And they also get another kicker, which we'll talk about that a little bit too. But Okelo, Buffalo Bills, what did you think of this draft?
I think Buffalo could not be happier with getting what they got in the middle and late rounds more than anything. I mean, to get AJ Epinesa to add to that Sean McDermott defense. Now, I know he has had a lot of question marks, and this was a guy that was originally going to likely be a first-round pick who flew down the boards, I think, not having that great of a combine, and, maybe he could have made it up for it on his pro day if he had one, which I thought that would have been the difference between him being a second-round and a first-round pick. I thought the Zach Moss pick was great, but it was surprising considering that you have Devin Singletary, which I think he's going to be their main back going forward. I mean, Gabe Davis, to get the guy from UCF who I think is going to fit in with that receiving core, to add in with a John Brown and a Cole Beasley and now a Stephon Diggs, Dawson Knox at tight end. I think this is going to elevate Josh Allen into year 3. To get Jake Fromm, I think he's going to be their backup quarterback, a project type. I was surprised a little bit that Jacob Eason went before him, considering the fact that Fromm had more longevity than Eason did. So that definitely surprised me. I think another good steal was Isaiah Hodgins. I think he could be more fitting into that maybe special team-ish type role. I see him maybe, being more on kick returns because he has the speed, and then Dane Johnson from Pitt. I like Buffalo's picks across the board. These are guys that are going to, have to work for it, but they are going to be, I think, great picks that could potentially be something great, especially Epinesa, who I think has a talent to be a Pro Bowl and a superstar type caliber defensive end, especially running Buffalo's defense with already loaded talent that they had. I think it was great all around for the Bills.
Mm-hmm. And to reference this way too early predictions mock draft, Matt Miller had AJ Epinesa going 3rd overall. So they get the top 4 picks, 2 of the top 4 picks from what was believed to be the top 4 picks from a year ago is what Buffalo ended up with. Robert, what did you think of Buffalo's draft?
Yeah, I mean, they I think knocked it out of the park with their first 4 picks. Epinesa was a shock that he fell that low. I had him on my personal mock draft. I had him going to the Seahawks. I had him going, in the first round, towards the top of the round. And I thought, the lowest he would fall was just, outside of the high of the second. But the fact that he fell to 54th all the way to Buffalo, I think, is just great value there. He's a great player for that defense, and it was already a really strong defense. I think Zach Moss is also a great pick. You put him with Devin Singletary back there. I think that's a nice 1-2 punch they got behind Josh Allen, and then adding Gabe Davis. I mean, he's the hometown kid. We love him here, and
charge on.
Charge on. And, Gabe Davis is just a great pick that they're going to put with Cole Beasley and obviously trading for Steph Diggs. I think wide receiver was their biggest concern going into the offseason. And, they addressed that before the draft. But, now getting a solid wide receiver in Gabe Davis, we know how good he is. We know how good he can be in the future as well in the NFL. And I think just adding another weapon like that is great. And then even taking Jake Fromm. I think Jake Fromm, makes a lot of sense. He is a project quarterback. He is a guy that is going to be the backup, and you can sort of build him and you can work with him. You don't have to worry about, oh my God, what happens if Josh Allen, because Josh Allen is still, building up his talent. He's working on his accuracy. So, you can kind of work with the both of them, and you can work with Jake Fromm more because you don't have to elevate him to starter status just yet, if ever. So, I think they did a great job in this draft, and they addressed a lot of needs, and they got great value for their picks. I mean, that's the theme of their draft is just great value.
Mm-hmm. I think I like this draft for the Bills. They got a lot of guys that I think were popular among analysts. However, I'm not a huge fan of this draft for Gabe Davis. I think that he's not going to be a starter for the Bills right away, especially with Stephon Diggs coming in. I think it's Diggs, John Brown, and Cole Beasley, and I think they have a strangle on those top 3 spots. Gabe Davis is probably going to be a solid backup for them, like a 4th wide receiver, and he could work his way into the mix, but not right away. So I think it's going to be difficult for him to get off the ground, but I hope that he can find. I hope that he can find some wiggle room into that offense. But let's give a grade for Buffalo, an actual grade, not just the grade for the Gabe Davis pick, of course. I'm gonna give them a B, a solid B, because I think that I think Epinesa though is probably the only person. I guess if you want to call Tyler Bass a starter, yes, but other than Tyler Bass, I think AJ Epinesa is really the only person that's going to be a starter on this team. I think Zach Moss is a good 3rd down back for them to replace Frank Gore from the role that he had last year. And I think Gabe Davis is not a starter yet. Obviously, Jake Fromm not a starter with Josh Allen there. They didn't get a whole lot of starters in this draft, so that's why I have to give Buffalo a B. Actually, I'm gonna give them a B minus. I think Epinesa is a great pick, but other than that, I just think that they don't have a lot of starters in this draft class. What do you think, Okelo?
I'm going to go with you too, Jeremy. I think a B minus. Like, some of these guys are going to have to work. Although I believe that this is the year the Bills are the 2020 AFC East Division champions, it doesn't have a lot of picks that woo me other than Espinosa that could come in right away and stuff. And Gabe Davis is going to have to work hard to prove that he's a part of that receiving corps. Now, do I believe he can fit in well with Josh Allen and them? Absolutely. I hope that's the plan, but it is going to be tough, especially when you have Diggs, Beasley, Brown, and Dawson Knox as your tight end. I think, Zach Moss kind of fits the rotation with what they want in terms of a bruising back with Frank Gore. So, other than this, some of these guys are going to have to work their way in. Now, the pick, now for this kicker pick, especially when you have Steven Hauschka, I think I guess for the future, because he is up there in age, but B minus all around. But this doesn't stop me from what I think the Bills, who are going to be, which is a playoff contending, dark horse Super Bowl contender, but no doubt AFC East Division champions this year.
Mm-hmm. Robert, what do we give them? Quick grade.
Yeah, I'm gonna give them a B. I like their picks. I think they got a lot of room to grow. Yeah, definitely. I think the division leaders, it's going to be very hard to top them. And they've added to an already strong team.
Mm-hmm. So let's move on to the final team in this division, the New York Jets. Started off the draft with a bit of a surprise, getting Mekhi Becton at number 11 overall. But they also add on to this draft, which is a pretty deep class of 9 guys. They get Denzel Mims in the second to be a wide receiver for them. I love the fit for Mims. He's going to get a chance to be a starter there. They get 2 Florida Gators, Jabari Zuniga in the 3rd round at edge, and LaMichael Pirine to be backup for Le'Veon Bell. He was one of 3 4th-round picks. They also got a new backup for Sam Darnold in James Morgan in the 4th as well. So, quick thoughts on the Jets draft, Okelo.
I call my uncle a little bit out of context a little here, but he definitely could scratch his head. He forgave Adam Gase and Joe Douglas a little bit for the Denzel Mims pick. To me, the Jets, I think, did a decent job in the draft, but I think I know what Joe Douglas wants. And it's if you have speed, if you have quickness, if you're fast, and if you're big, you're definitely going to be somewhat of a chance. My hope is that I just hope he didn't look at Mekhi Becton's Instagram video of pushing a huge Ford F-150 as a reason for being a first-round pick. But I digress. I think that, the Jets did a decent job. It's not necessarily my favorite draft for Adam Gase and company to really, kind of help elevate Sam Darnold and company. But you look all around, LaMichael Pirine, a decent backup for Le'Veon Bell. Instead of him taking the pressure off every down. Jabari Zuniga, a great edge rusher to replace Leonard Williams. I think solid all around, fits what they needed to fill the holes with certain things, especially corner. I think Bryce Hall going in the 5th round out of Virginia. Tremaine Johnson just isn't getting it done, and I think that he's going to come in and do something great. What surprised me was the punters, but punters are people too, Brad and Maine. So New York did a okay job, to say the least, but definitely something where if it doesn't work out, it's been the history of the Jets draft. So you just hope that they know what they're doing in this first installment of the Douglas Gase era.
Yeah. Robert, quick thoughts.
Yeah, they definitely addressed offensive line like they needed to, even though they signed, I think, 4 offensive linemen in free agency. Mekhi Becton is clearly a starter there. Even though I think he's the worst of the 4, that's not saying much. He's still a top 4 offensive lineman. So they addressed that. I thought getting Denzel Mims made a lot of sense. There's not a lot of depth at wide receiver on the Jets. It's Brashard Perriman, it's Jamison Crowder, and that's it. And now it's Denzel Mims. So that made a lot of sense. I like the Zuniga pick as well. And I actually really like the Ashton Davis pick as well. I think that's a great draft pick as well.
I think with Mekhi Becton, you have a starter. I think with Denzel Mims, you have a starter. I think even with Ashton Davis, who knows what the future holds for Jamal Adams. I think that they want to keep him, but I think that if they do decide that they want to move on from Jamal Adams, just because they can possibly get a first round pick for him if they trade him pretty soon, that Ashton Davis can step in, I think, and be a starter as well. I think that that's kind of what they were trying to do, is they were trying to see what they had in Ashton Davis and then decide on Jamal Adams. So for me, I think that's 3 potential starters for this team right here. So I'm going to give the Jets a solid B+. I really like what they did with their top 3 picks. I think they have also potential later in the draft. Guys like Bryce Hall. I thought he was a good pick out of Virginia. I'm going to give them a solid B.
Mm-hmm.
B for the Jets. Final answer.
I'm sure.
Yeah. What do you think, Robert?
Yeah. So I think I would give the Jets a B+. I think the Jets addressed all their needs. They got a wide receiver for depth. They don't have a lot of good wide receivers, like I was saying, with Jamison Crowder and Brashad Perriman being really their only other options. So Mims fills that need, and I think they hit well on Ashton Davis, and they got a top 4 offensive lineman. So for me, it's a B+. I mean, they addressed a lot of their needs, and they're going to be a better team next year.
Yeah. Okelo, quick thoughts on the Jets and give them a grade.
I want to be critical so much on Adam Gase and Joe Douglas, but they did address a lot of needs, some guys that are going to be projects to work on. I think this draft is predicated a little bit on the first 3 rounds and how these guys pan out with Zuniga, Mims, and especially Mekhi Becton. This isn't a slam dunk for Joe Douglas and Adam Gase. I'm gonna go with a C, just because I had a better expectation for the Jets, and my hope is that Adam Gase, you better know what you're doing. Mm-hmm. That's all I'm gonna say.
So let's move on to the final division here, the South. We'll start off with a team that was just one win away from a Super Bowl. Very surprising that the Tennessee Titans were in that position, but they came out of the draft with 6 picks. They had Isaiah Wilson in the first round and Christian Fulton in the second round. They get a backup for Derrick Henry in Darrington Evans in the third, and then they go get some depth pieces on day 3, including Hawaii quarterback Cole McDonald. So, Robert, I'll start with you. What did you like about this Tennessee Titans draft?
I think they took an offensive tackle, which was the right move for them. Isaiah Wilson is a little bit of a stretch as a first-round pick, but, they do need some offensive line help to sort of patch some of the holes they lost in free agency, and also to ensure that Ryan Tannehill is worth that huge contract they gave him this offseason. I think the bigger pick that they hit on was Christian Fulton. I thought getting him at 61 was great. Christian Fulton was another one where a lot of people were torn between either a high second-round pick or even a first-round pick. And I think the fact that they got Fulton at 61, he's a great corner. He was great at LSU, and I think he's going to be really good on that Titans defense. So I really liked what they did there. And then even Darrington Evans, I think that's a great backup to Derrick Henry. I think, they put so much on Derrick Henry's shoulders, or rather on his knees, since he is a running back. You don't want to burn him out. So I think getting a solid backup like Darrington Evans in this draft, I think, is a great move for them going forward, where they don't have to worry about burning Derrick Henry out when you see what happens with other top running backs like Todd Gurley and, so many of the situations surrounding running backs in the NFL these days.
Mm-hmm. I really liked what the Titans did actually with Cole McDonald as a value pick in the 7th. I think that was I think that, if Tannehill, you got to keep in mind, even though they did sign Tannehill to a huge contract, he's going to be 32 when next season starts. So he's not, as much as, they signed him to what, like a 4-year contract?
I think a 5-year, 82 mil.
5-year, yeah. So, they have him locked in, but, the fact that you get Cole McDonald as the backup, if he gets hurt or if he, doesn't pan out, I think Cole McDonald has a lot of potential to possibly work his way into some money. I think he could work his way into a long career too. So Cole McDonald, I think, was a good value pick. Obviously, he's not going to start because they have, boatload of money up at quarterback with Ryan Tannehill. But to get Cole McDonald when they did, I thought was very impressive as well. Also, Laurel Murchison, to get him late, they needed defensive tackle help. They got that. Jeffrey Simmons, he needs like a partner there. He has Laurel Murchison now. I expect Murchison to actually possibly pan out as well. Christian Fulton also has the chance to pan out, especially considering the fact that Logan Ryan's no longer on the team. So, and obviously Isaiah Wilson should be a day one starter. So, to me, despite this draft being very small for the Titans, I think they got a lot of strong picks. I think you have at least 2, possibly 3 starters on this team moving forward. Okelo, what is your least favorite pick from Tennessee?
It's really tough for me to go because, I think it was Cole McDonald. I think the reason the Titans, got him is because, he has a good arm. I think he has some good potential there. But, for me, the Titans, I think it was hard for them this year because they could have potentially gotten a quarterback. I think, they traded back with Green Bay. They could have likely stood with that pick, get Jordan Love to develop and stuff. That pick would have made more sense, but I thought Isaiah Wilson was the steal of the draft and underrated. But, my predicate on McDonald is especially he's a 7th round quarterback. I just hope that he's not coming in as camp bait just to run with the 3rd and 4th strings and not make the roster. So, my question is if can McDonald be that type of dependable backup for him to be, slated enough for this exotic Smashville, Tennessee team?
Mm-hmm. I mean, Marcus Mariota left in free agency, so they did need a backup quarterback, and they got that with Cole McDonald. So, I think he makes the roster. I think all of these draft picks make the roster here. So, that's why I really like this draft for Tennessee. I think there's some starters there. I think that there is. I think all of them make the team. I give them a B plus because I think that you have 2 for sure starters and some good depth pieces with Evans and McDonald. Murchison also has potential to start. So for me, it's a B plus. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I'm gonna go B plus as well. I think with the low amount of picks that they did have, I thought they hit really well with them. We'll see what happens going forward, but I agree. I think a lot of them most of them can be, first day starters, and that's what you want out of a draft like this. When you don't have that many picks, you want to be able to hit on all of them, and you want all of them to be starters. So the Titans definitely got great value for their picks that they did have.
Mm-hmm. Okay, what are we thinking?
Great situation for a lot of these guys to come in and play. Isaiah Wilson to fill in for Jack Conklin, Laurel Murchison to fill in for Jarrell Casey. Mm-hmm. I think, it's great value. Some guys that are question marks, but I think for a team that, is very predicate on getting close to the Super Bowl, if not a contender for the division, let alone the AFC this year, I think a B plus is a very good for the Tennessee Titans.
Yeah, so let's talk about the Indianapolis Colts next. A team that had 2 second-rounders. They traded up to get Jonathan Taylor after they selected Michael Pittman. They went skill players early in this draft to help out Phillip Rivers, their new quarterback. They also got him a backup quarterback on day 3 with Jacob Eason, someone that could be the long-term guy for them. But they also addressed a lot of different positions. They get Julian Blackmon in the 3rd at safety. They get Rob Windsor at defensive tackle in the 6th round. And they did what no team since the 2015 draft has done. They drafted 3 consecutive picks, 211, 212, 213, all going to the Indianapolis Colts. Isaiah Rodgers from UMass, Desmond Patman from Washington State, and Jordan Glasgow from Michigan. So, Indianapolis's draft, they have 9 pieces to work with, but no first-round picks, Robert. What is your favorite pick from the Colts haul?
For me, it's Michael Pittman. I think Michael Pittman is such an underrated wide receiver. I think people are finally starting to realize how good he was in college. He has the potential to be like a Juju Smith-Schuster. I've always felt that even at USC, he was very comparable to Juju. I love the guy at USC. I thought he was just fantastic. If there's one thing that USC does churn out, it isn't quarterbacks, it's wide receivers.
Mm-hmm.
And
Amen.
I think Michael Pittman is a great pick at 34th. I think he's just such a great explosive wide receiver, and he can be a game changer. Yeah, and that's a nice weapon for Phillip Rivers to have.
Despite going 34th in this draft, Michael Pittman was the 8th wide receiver taken, which is crazy to me to think. But Okelo, they took Jonathan Taylor 41st overall. Mm-hmm. Running back was not their biggest need. They have Marlon Mack. They have Nyheim Hines. But why do you think they went with Jonathan Taylor at 41st overall?
I think to complement potentially what Marlon Mack and Nyheim Hines bring. I mean, when you look at Nyheim Hines and Marlon Mack, and I should speak for Matt because, I had him on my fantasy team last year, but then again, I'm not going to be biased on this. But I think because that they're small and that they deliver the good package, but they're more of hybrid backs. I think Frank Wright wants to try to run the ball down your throat a little bit, and they do have the offensive line to do it. I mean, when you have guys like Quentin Nelson, and then you add guys like Danny Pinter to help boost that offensive line and to give Phillip Rivers some ease and stuff, you kind of do need sort of that bruising back a little bit in the NFL, even though they're kind of a bit of a dying breed. I like the Jonathan Taylor pick. I'm not happy about it. I think he could have been better elsewhere, but I think for what the Colts want to do with this team this year, which is kind of be like, we're still going to be a good offensive competitive team, but if you think we're going to go quietly, wait until you see what we got with Jonathan Taylor, and we're going to ram it down your throat. So I think it's a good pick based off of giving the help. And, Mack and Hines do have a little bit of injury history, so I think getting a third solid guy to come in there helps. And other than that, the Colts, I think, did just a good job all around to build the pieces enough to, if not contend in that AFC South title picture.
Yeah, I think that the Colts have a tendency the past couple of years to get guys in on day 2 and on day 3 that truly that pan out. And I think that they've done that here with I think they've gotten Darius Leonard, who led the league in tackles his first year. Bobby Okereke is a really good pick for them from past years. I think in this draft, that guy is I think Jacob Eason. I actually think Eason could be the future for them. I really liked what he brought out of Washington. Look, the thing is, he was the starting quarterback for that Georgia team that went to the national championship, and until he got hurt. And ultimately Jake Fromm obviously totally outplayed and did everything that he could have to ensure that Jacob Eason was not going to get that job again. He goes to Washington, plays in the Pac-12, and he holds his own. And in fact, he was chosen before Jake Fromm. I think that's something to keep of note. I think that he's a bit more consistent. He gets to learn behind Phillip Rivers, which I think is critical. And I really like to. I love to see what he brings in the future. I think Indianapolis did a good job on this draft, given the fact that they didn't even have a first round pick. I'd give them a B. I think that Michael Pittman could be the best pick out of this bunch. He's a starter for them long term. Other than that, though, I don't see a whole lot of promise, but of course, knowing the Colts, probably one of these guys will pan out as a guy that they draft that will be a starter for them long term. I could see it being Jacob Eason. Maybe it's Julian Blackmon. Who knows? But I'm gonna give them a B minus. I'll switch. I'll be B minus just because I'm not sure if this draft class has a lot of star power, but it does have Michael Pittman, and I'm worried about Michael Pittman facing my Texans twice a year now. But I've got to deal with that. So B minus for the Colts. What do you think, Okelo?
I got to give Indy a B plus. I think the value of their picks and the guys that they get. I mean, I love Julian Blackmon. I mean, Malik Hooker has been up and down. He was really good for the first 2 years, and then he kind of slowed down this year. But I think that you get him a tag team partner to help him out there, to be that anchor and to be, another hard-nosed type, especially running a type of dime package that Indy seems to favor a little bit. It is great. Jacob Eason was my biggest question mark, though, because of the fact that he only started 1 year. I watched him at Georgia as a freshman. I saw something there, but it's the matter of can he, catch up into today's NFL. I think the Colts filled their need, and with especially what they got out of free agency to help their defense, getting DeForest Buckner and then Phillip Rivers to be your quarterback. All around, the Colts have done great this offseason. There are going to be some guys that they're going to have to, work up and build. But I think knowing this team and knowing how Frank Wright wants to coach, he's going to get the guys to play at the highest level. B+ for me for Indy.
B+ for Indy with Okelo. And what do we think, Robert?
I'm going to give them a B. I do like what they did a lot. I think, like I was saying with Michael Pittman, I think Michael Pittman, is a big game wide receiver, and he's going to be a great option for Phillip Rivers and for the Colts moving forward. I like the Blackman draft pick as well. I think that's a really good pick. And I think Jonathan Taylor, even though they didn't really need a running back, I think Jonathan Taylor is such a great running back, and he was breaking records in college. I think he's such an explosive running back up there with Swift that it made sense to take a guy like that just to solidify your run game, and I think he's a great pick as well. And even the Jacob Eason pick makes a lot of sense for me. I mean, Phillip Rivers is a short-term quarterback. He's not a long-term answer. And if they can get Jacob Eason to learn from Phillip Rivers to, build his game up and eventually take over that starting role, I think the Colts have set themselves up nicely here with Jacob Eason. So I thought they had a really solid draft.
Yeah. All right, let's move on to Jacksonville here. They came away from the 2020 draft with 12 draft picks to call their own, starting off with C.J. Henderson at 9th overall out of Florida, and they get K'Lavon Chaisson all later in the first round with the 20th overall pick. Laviska Shenault, someone that we talked about as a potential first-round pick, fell to 42 and was taken by the Jags. They addressed a lot of different needs. They went cornerback, edge rusher, wide receiver. They got 2 of them. They got a backup quarterback for Gardner Minshew. They got safeties, tackles, tight end. They fulfilled really everything, Robert.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, they needed to address a lot of holes on that team, and I thought they did very well to fill a lot of those holes. Starting with C.J. Henderson, they needed a starting corner after trading Jalen Ramsey last season. Taking C.J. Henderson. Henderson is arguably the best corner in the draft. They took him. They needed an edge rusher. They got K'Lavon Chaisson. They needed a wide receiver for Gardner Minshew. They took Laviska Shenault. Again, first-round talent that was taken in the second round. They needed to shore up the offensive line for Gardner Minshew. And they got Ben Barch out of St. John's. I thought that was a great pick. And I also thought getting Josiah Scott as, more corner depth out of Michigan State, I thought they did a really good job to fill a lot of those holes because they have so many holes on both defense and offense. And they need to protect Gardner Minshew. They need to get Gardner Minshew a weapon. They did that. They needed to get that replacement for Jalen Ramsey and get some depth on their secondary. They did that. So I thought they did a great job in the draft last week with those 12 picks to, take guys that they needed that they can help build up that defense, build up that offense, and really get back on the right track.
Yeah, I think, I'll be honest. I'm not a huge fan of the C.J. Henderson pick. I don't think 9th overall was where he should have gone. I guess if you want to say corners, he probably was the best available corner at that spot. So maybe I'm being too harsh on the pick, but I don't know. I think C.J. Henderson's a good CB2. It worries me that he's going to face wide receiver ones that like the possession receivers that are just going to chew him up, and then they're going to break tackles on him. And that to me is what's concerning because he does have tackling issues. So that's concerning for me. I think K'Lavon Chaisson is a good replacement for Yannick Ngakoue, who I can't see putting on a Jags uniform ever again. Laviska Chenault's also a decent pick for the Jags. Put him opposite DJ Chark. There are some good pieces here, and I do think there are pieces that can be long-term options for Jacksonville. But the 9th overall pick, spending it on C.J. Henderson, is he's who this draft class is going to be defined by. And I'm not, to get him as a replacement for Jalen Ramsey of all people, he's just not there. But Okelo, maybe you can help me out with C.J. Henderson and explain to me why he is a good pick at 9th overall.
I think the Jaguars just love this athleticism. I think, he's definitely a speedy guy, and I think, not only could his ability on coverage and in terms of the defense that the Jaguars run could fit him, but I think, he brings the type of speed, and his uses could be all around in certain instances, and I think he could even be, if you want him to, even though he didn't do it much in college, be a kick return special teamers, which I think he could definitely become. I'll admit, though, you're saying, though, with Jalen Ramsey, to me, I thought Jalen was he's not, to me, an elite corner. I think he's a top 10 corner. But, I think, C.J. Henderson does have a lot of shoes to fill. I'm not expecting him to be a lockdown corner, but I'm expecting him to be an impact player. And, and he's not going to have to really worry much about the threats of facing, deep wide receiver ones in the AFC South division. Of course, in the AFC, he is going to face guys potentially, like A.J. Green, Tyreek Hill. But I think with his speed, and the way that the Jaguars could develop him in this defense, they could run it. I think, even Kyle Partain told me he was excited about it. So I think C.J. Henderson could be somebody that, it may look good on draft tape, but I think in the long run, the Jaguars are going to love what they get from him.
Okay. Jalen Ramsey, okay, he's a top 10 corner to you, but you say not elite. So how many people are in the elite category?
All right. Well, I personally think, though, that Marcus Peters, to me, is an elite corner.
So you think Marcus Peters is better than Jalen Ramsey?
No way.
Absolutely. I mean, pick six Peters?
Robert,
are you
both
kidding?
Rams corners.
Every
Would
play,
you agree with that
he makes
statement?
an impact.
What?
Is Jalen Ramsey better than Marcus Peters?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, he is. I mean, I think Jalen Ramsey is arguably top 3. I think it's him, Marlon Humphrey, and it's Steph Gilmore. I think that's your top 3 corners in the NFL. And the Rams definitely got an upgrade with Ramsey over Peters. I think that was, even though it costed them a lot, it made a lot of sense.
If you're talking fast talkers, Robert, I think, Marcus Peters fits, Jalen Ramsey fits that build, but he'll run his mouth and then he can't back it up. He's too hot and too cold. He just never, to me, he can never back up what he says, and that's why I don't think of him as elite. He'll have one good game, and then he'll get shut out by OBJ and Julio, and then it's like, are you really what you say you are? That's my concern, though. That's why I don't have him as an elite corner. Marlon Humphrey, Steph Gilmore, absolutely. But Marcus Peters, he makes almost interceptions for touchdowns almost every single week, and he shuts down. He's great. How could you not say he's a top 3 elite corner? Come on.
He's definitely, he's definitely top 5, I think. Maybe definitely top 10. I think maybe even top 5. But I think one of the things with Peters right now is that he's alongside Marlon Humphrey. I mean, he has that assistance that he didn't really have with the Rams. So, I think Marcus Peters is up there, but he's another guy, he runs his mouth a lot. He picks fights with fans and stuff like that. He's another one that since he was with the Chiefs, he's had, on the field issues. So, he's another one. It's just, but I think with Jalen Ramsey, you see that he's just a top corner. You see that he's a shutdown corner. He can go up against any top wide receiver, and yes, he'll struggle with certain wide receivers, but he is a true shutdown corner. And this is the guy that is worth 2 first-round picks. I think he, not to stray away from the debate, but I think those two are very comparable, but I think Ramsey is just clearly better, and Humphrey's up there. Humphrey is clearly better than Marcus Peters and Steph Gilmore. So that would be my top 3. Just putting that in perspective.
All right.
I think the Rams are going to cap hell for that.
This is a discussion for another day. But Jacksonville's grade, what are we giving them?
A minus. They did a great job of getting some guys with some upside who could potentially pay off, especially the Ben Barch pick, which I think is a guy who, could develop into somewhat of an NFL tackle. I mean, he did switch positions in college, going from tight end to tackle, which is a big leap, but his blocking ability, unbelievable. I think he was definitely a wild card of the middle rounds that definitely could be something of a great pick for them. And then, I like Colin Johnson a little bit. All the focus was on Devin Duvernay, but I think he's a good slot option, a potential XY hybrid. Shaquille Quarterman. Now, this was a guy I watched at Miami. My uncle loves the Miami Hurricanes as well. He thinks Quarterman can be something great, especially to replace Telvin Smith in the front. Jaguars addressed all their needs to build up in this reload era, but I'm screaming Duval a little bit to give him a big A. Duval!
All right, so Okelo once again declaring his fandom for another team. I'm going to give the Jags a B minus. I think that Kayvon Chaisson is their best pick of this draft. I'm not sold on CJ Henderson. I'm not sold on Ben Barch as you guys are. I think that he's a good depth piece. I don't think he's going to start for them. Shaquille Quarterman is going to be a backup for Joe Schobert this year. They don't have a whole lot of starters, I think, for this team. I think it's Chaisson, Henderson, Chenault. That's about it. And Chenault's probably I don't know. I'm not convinced on Chenault either. I'm worried about his health. I'm giving the Jags a B minus. I think that they had picks. I think that they were decent. I think they could have done slightly better with what they had. So B minus for Jacksonville. And the final team that we have here is my Houston Texans. So if you guys don't mind, I'm going to take this one over. A small draft class for the Texans. Just 5 picks. No first rounder this year. Obviously with Laramie Tunsil still on the roster, but I'm still very happy with the Texans draft. Given for what it was. Ross Blacklock fills a need at defensive tackle, which is their first pick of this draft. With DJ Reader going to Cincinnati, he can play defensive tackle right away for Houston. I think it was a great pick. Jonathan Grenard was the second pick in the 3rd round out of UF. I think that he can also be a dynamic player right away. Could be even a starter at the edge position that they really did need, because I think if they weren't the lowest sacking team last season, they were definitely in the bottom 5 in the NFL. They do need some help in the front 7. They got that with Jonathan Grenard. The last 3 picks they had are depth pieces. Charlie Heck from North Carolina. He's a backup tackle. They really like him though. He's 6'8". Hey, when a tackle's 6'8", that excites a lot of people. So Charlie Heck, John Reed, another Reed for the secondary. Hopefully they'll sign Eric Reed to form the trifecta. And then Isaiah Coulter is basically a depth piece at wide receiver. The team, there's a myth here that with the departure of DeAndre Hopkins, that they need wide receiver help. That's not the case. They do have, for me, I think Brandon Cooks, although he's not DeAndre Hopkins, he still is a dynamic receiver. He's going to help them a lot. They also have Randall Cobb, who will fill in at the slot. Kenny Stills, Will Fuller, when he's healthy, is incredible. They have a lot of solid receivers. I think Houston, they have Blacklock and Grenard are definitely going to be strong pieces for that front 7. I'm glad they addressed those early in the draft. I'm giving Houston here a solid B. Obviously, not having a first-round pick hurts their case and only getting 5 picks. But I think that, these guys are smart football players, and I think that's what they were going for with every pick. And that's why I like the Texans draft for what it was worth. So a B for me. What did you guys think, Okelo?
This was kind of like a decent. It's a hit or miss for the Texans. It's definitely filling needs, but guys that have a lot of potential upside, or they could have a lot of potential downside. Ross Blacklock is one player who I think filled the need, but this was a guy who did have some injury concerns coming out. I was surprised a little bit how in a lot of mock drafts that he became a borderline first round pick. I think maybe if he had stayed healthy, if he didn't have his torn Achilles injury in 2018, he did a good rebound. But I think, if he was more healthy, I could see him being more of the upside. I like Jonathan Greenyard because he is an edge rusher. He doesn't have a lot of athleticism, that you see, but he did produce. And then Jonathan Reed, I think, was a steal for the corner, especially losing Jonathan Joseph to the division rival Titans. I think now he could come in and be a good replacement. With not a lot, it's a hit or miss for me. Jeremy, I know you may not like this, but I'm going to give the Texans a C- on this one, just because I think, it's how these picks are going to play out. These guys are questionable, and it's a matter of if they're going to be boom or bust, and it's going to be predicated because now Bill O'Brien's your GM and head coach, so this is doubled down on how hard it is going to be for them, depending on how these guys produce and play well to compete.
All right, so Okelo is a fan of 31 NFL teams, every team but the Texans. So, Robert, what grade are we giving the Texans?
I'd give him a B. I really, really like the Ross Blacklock pick. Already on lists and betting odds to be a top 10 rookie of the year. I mean, he's a really, really good defensive lineman. I think he's really going to help them out a lot in a position that they did need. I think Jonathan Grenard is a great pick as well. You're shoring up that defense. That's what you need to do with the Texans. I mean, they needed help there, and that's where they're getting it. And I think even the John Reed pick is a solid pick. I think they did a really good job. After a really controversial offseason with their fans trading DeAndre Hopkins, I thought they did very well in the draft to fix their defense a little bit, make it a little bit better, and I think they're going to, at least defensively, they're in a good position going forward. We'll have to see what happens with, the wide receiver depth and all that. But, it's definitely going to be an interesting season for the Texans. And I think they're getting off on the right foot this time around after the draft.
Mm-hmm. All right. So now that we've graded all these teams, I guess it's safe to say that the teams that we liked, Denver comes into mind as a team that we really liked, and I'm trying to think who else. Miami, Denver, and Miami were two teams that probably are at the top of our list, and then I guess teams that aren't so high on our list. I guess we didn't like New England's draft a whole lot, and we really weren't a fan of Pittsburgh's draft. So, but what is one team's draft that you guys think could change the balance of power in the AFC moving forward?
Robert, you want to go first? I got to really ponder this one.
I think the only thing I can think of is the AFC East. With the Patriots not having a great draft and having a really disappointing offseason, with Brady leaving, and I mean, I guess you can count Gronkowski into that, even though he wasn't last year. Mm-hmm. And the fact that they haven't really added any wide receiver depth, and they're rolling with a question mark at quarterback. I think it's really going to change. I think it's the Bills' division to lose. I think the Bills got better, and they were already, very good last year. They were already a playoff team. I think what's really up for debate in terms of balance of power is where did the Patriots finish? Do the Patriots finish fourth in that division? Because I think Miami got a lot better. I mean, Miami's defense alone is incredibly better.
You think Miami's better than New England right now? You gonna say that right now?
I can. I think I can. I mean, I think
with confidence. Say it with chest.
If they can build off of Mike Gesicki and Devontae Parker and Ryan Fitzpatrick was actually really good in the second half last season. If their offensive line with Eric Flowers and Austin Jackson can be better this year, and obviously how much money they spent on that defense, and I think they really did get good defensively there. They're looking at second or third, I think. I don't see how, they were terrible last year and they still finished with 5 wins. I mean, now they actually have a solid defense. I don't see how they don't get at least 2 or 3 more wins. And the same thing with the Jets. I mean, the Jets addressed their offensive line like they needed to. So I don't see how they're not going to be better. And I just don't see how the Patriots are going to be better than any of those 3 teams. It's a lot of question marks on the offense and
Robert,
the defense.
I have a feeling in 6 months' time you're going to look back on this and feel really silly. I to be honest,
Could.
this is a trick question, I think, because to be honest, I don't think that the balance of power really changes in the AFC here. I still think it's. I think if you had to ask me right now, would you take Baltimore or Kansas City, or would you take the field? I would take Baltimore or Kansas City. Those two teams are head and shoulders ahead, I think, above every other team in the AFC. I would be shocked if one of those teams did not come out of the AFC this year. I think that it's just Baltimore got a lot better. I think Baltimore, their draft class is better than Kansas City's. A lot of that has to do with the fact that they had more picks. But I think that Baltimore and Kansas City, the rich got richer, and they continued to create some distance between them and the rest of the AFC. What do you think, Okelo? Last thoughts.
I don't think that this is going to be a draft that I look at as a balance of shift power, as more or less of teams that are building up to fight within their division. And when I look back on this draft, I'm going to see two divisions to me that stand out the biggest, and that's the AFC West and the AFC North, especially the AFC North. Granted, I think this is going to be a tell of the future of how that division is going to pan out. If you give me today on, for example, who could win the North, the odds on has to be Baltimore, but I think you can't count out the Browns with who they have,
yes,
especially the pieces they added.
Yes, you can.
It's up
Baltimore
to Baker Mayfield.
Is still way better than Cleveland. You are overthinking this.
I think the Browns could potentially surprise a lot of people, Jeremy. I think
they're not better than the Ravens.
We'll see. I think if you look at the roster talent-wise, I think Baker Mayfield has a little bit more pieces than Lamar Jackson does. And I think it's a matter of, can he make it work? And I think for the Steelers, it's a matter of, we have the defense. We got to fix the offense up a little bit. We got to make sure Ben Roethlisberger is fully healthy, because I think he can still produce a very good season, enough to make the Steelers creep up back in the conversation of AFC contenders. And then the Bengals, they're going to be a project, but it's going to be for the fat long term of how they're going to progress. To me, and especially in the West, because now the Broncos are looking to be that thorn in Kansas City's side. I wouldn't say not this year, but maybe the following year or the year down the line. That I think this is a draft where it's going to be competition for division and a competition to fight for an AFC playoff race that's going to be expanded now that we have an extra team available, 7 teams in. So it's going to be competition times 10. But I just think that the winner is going to be the best division in football, which is the AFC North.
All right, well, that's a wrap on this episode of the Hitting the Field podcast. Thank you, Okelo and Robert, for popping on the show today. So you can catch the AFC or the NFC edition of this podcast on our YouTube channel and our and wherever you listen to podcasts by searching Hitting the Field on the podcast net on wherever you listen to podcasts. We will be doing some more football things next week. I'm in the process of currently creating my version of the 2020 NFL schedule, and we will hopefully be able to get that podcast out within a week or two, depending on my schedule for the next couple of weeks. I'm working on possibly driving halfway across the country over the next couple of days, so but we will have more podcast coverage for you next week. Of course, every Monday, for the next 3 Mondays, we will have Last Dance recaps, so catch that out every Monday. And we also have Hitting the Crew and Take Me Out to the Podcast still going on during the summer, as Hitting the Field attempts to go and bring you year-long sports coverage. So again, thank you so much for tuning into this episode of the Hitting the Field podcast, and we'll catch you on the flip side.